and Negroes was out there in the streets. They was talking about we're going to march on Washington. By the way, right at that time, Birmingham had exploded, and the Negroes in Birmingham, remember, they also exploded. They began to stab the crackers in the back and bust them upside the head. Yes, they did. That's when Kennedy sent in the troops down in Birmingham. So, and right after that, Kennedy got on the television and said, this is a moral issue. That's when he said he's going to put out a civil rights bill. And when he mentioned civil rights bill and the Southern crackers started talking about they were going to boycott it or filibuster it, then the Negroes started talking about what? We're going to march on Washington, march on the Senate, march on the White House, march on the Congress, and tie it up, bring it to a halt. Don't let the government proceed. They even said they was going to go out to the airport and lay down on the runway and don't let no airplanes land. I'm telling you what they said. That was revolution. That was revolution. That was the black revolution. It was the grassroots out there in the street. Scared the white man to death. Scared the white power structure in Washington, D.C. to death. I was there. When they found out that this black steamroller was going to come down on the Capitol, they called in Wilkins. They called in Randolph. They called in these national Negro leaders that you respect and told them, call it off. Kennedy said, look, you all letting this thing go too far. And old Tom said, boss, I can't stop it because I didn't start it. I'm telling you what they said. They said, I'm not even in it, much less at the head of it. They said, these Negroes are doing things on their own. They're running ahead of us. And that old shrewd fox, he said, well, if you all aren't in it, I'll put you in it. I'll put you at the head of it. I'll endorse it. I'll welcome it. I'll help it. I'll join it. A matter of hours went by. They had a meeting at the Carlisle Hotel in New York City. The Carlisle Hotel is owned by the Kennedy family. That's the hotel Kennedy spent the night at 2 nights ago. Belongs to his family. A philanthropic society headed by a white man named Stephen Currier called all the top civil rights leaders together at the Carlisle Hotel and told them that by you all fighting each other, you're destroying the civil rights movement. And since you're fighting over money from white liberals, let us set up what's known as the Council for United Civil Rights Leadership. Let's form this council, and all the civil rights organizations will belong to it. And we'll use it for fundraising purposes. Let me show you how tricky the white man is. And as soon as they got it formed, they elected Whitney Young as the chairman. And who you think became the co-chairman? Stephen Currier, the white man. A millionaire. Powell was talking about it down at the Cobo today. This is what he was talking about. Powell knows it happened. Randolph knows it happened. Wilkins knows it happened. King knows it happened. Every one of that so-called Big Six. They know what happened. Once they formed it, with the white man over it, he promised them and gave them $800,000 to split up between the Big Six. And told them that after the march was over, they'd give them $700,000 more. $1.5 million split up between leaders that you've been following, going to jail for, crying crocodile tears for, and they've nothing but Frank James and Jesse James and brothers. Soon as they got the setup organized, the white man made available to them top public relations experts. Opened the news media across the country at their disposal. And then they began to project these Big Six as the leaders of the march. Originally, they weren't even in the march. You was talking this march talk on Hastings Street. Is Hastings Street still here? On Hastings Street. You was talking the march talk on Lenox Avenue. And down on, Fillmore Street. And Central Avenue. And 42nd Street and 63rd Street. That's where the march talk was being talked. But the white man put the big six ahead of it, made them the march. They became the march. They took it over. And the first move they made after they took it over, they invited Walter Reuther, a white man. They invited a priest, a rabbi, and an old white preacher. Yes, an old white preacher. The same white element that put Kennedy in power labored, the Catholics, the Jews, and liberal Protestants. Same clique that put Kennedy in power joined the March on Washington. It's just like when you got some coffee that's too black, which means it's too strong. What you do, you integrate it with cream. You make it weak. If you pour too much cream in, you won't even know you ever had coffee. It used to be hot, it becomes cool. It used to be strong, it becomes weak. It used to wake you up, now it'll put you to sleep. This is what they did with the March on Washington. They joined it. They didn't integrate it, they infiltrated it. They joined it, became a part of it, took it over. And as they took it over, it lost its militancy. They ceased to be angry. They ceased to be hot. They ceased to be uncompromising. Why, it even ceased to be a march. It became a picnic.
The Cows. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Sunday, March 30, 2025. So I have been told. Always grand to hear Minister Malcolm X just had so-called Black History Month, and I guess at this point, so we're 60 years removed from the assassination of Minister Malcolm X, February 21, 1965. 60 years removed from that event. Always good to hear, and particularly that speech from November 1963. Important for so many reasons. And even in the midst of our studies, what we have been discussing, Catherine Massey Book Club, our latest book, Abraham Bolden's The Echo from Dealey Plaza, about the assassination of JFK, I just said that year, 1963, wow, from beginning to end, what a year, and plop right in the middle. I guess that's towards the end, but he's kind of talking about things that happened earlier in that year and the lead up to the farce on Washington, March on Washington, and what happened there. And to even think, March on Washington, August 28th, 1963, by the time you get to November, not even the end of the year, just Thanksgiving, President Kennedy would be dead. Church in Birmingham, Alabama bombed, those 4 little girls dead. Vietnam conflict escalated. Minister Malcolm X booted out of the Nation of Islam, and Dr. King gets the Nobel Peace Prize. Whew, what a year. And that's just the back half. Anyway, our text for today touches on quite a bit of this subject matter. Said we have uncanny how frequently that happens, but this touches on many of the subject matters we're talking about right now, and a number of subject matters that we've been talking about, I don't know, for a few months. Even John Genet's The Blacks, a clown show. Like, this dude I'd never even heard of. Now he comes up every day. Like, somehow I was interested in our guest for today's program a while related to other subject matter. I was originally interested in the book Finks, How the CIA Trafficked the World's Best Writers. And I'm still tracking back in my brain computer what was the original impetus, what got me interested to seek out such a book and all of that. I'm tracking back at my brain computer. Maybe it'll come to me directly. Our schedules crisscrossed and such, all of that. Anywho, by the time things work out, people, authors, often don't just write one book, they write other texts. Now we don't have Finks. Now, newer book published in 2023, Flights, Radicals on the Run. And there is a relationship between the two books. Hopefully we can get him to share a tad bit of that with us during the evening. One of the main characters in that book, Flights, Minister Malcolm X. Why I played that speech specifically because it's talked about directly, even a tidbit from the part that we heard today. In addition to the two books that I have mentioned, our guest for this evening, he is a Brooklyn-based writer whose work has been featured in the New York Times, the Daily Beast, the Baffler, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, Boston Review, and many, many other platforms. Super excited to have him on the program and talk about some of his great work. Joining us live, our guest, Mr. Joel Whitney. Mr. Whitney, you with us, sir?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your Sunday evening with us. You could have been watching basketball or working on new books. For listeners, this might be their first time hearing about you and your great work. Any brief tidbits you would like to share about who you are and the work that you do?
No, you covered it beautifully, and for the record, I was just watching the Warriors beat the Spurs.
He still got in the hoops action. Right on. Because Steph Curry, woo, San Francisco comes up in the book. Okay. Let's see. Folks can check out the books. We'll discuss some of the info as we proceed. For folks who have not seen you, you are classified as a white man. Is that true?
That is correct.
Grand. This program, we ask our guests quite a bit, certainly Flights. Racism pops up quite a bit from beginning to end. On this broadcast, I use the term racism as a synonym with the term white supremacy. I use the same definition for both terms. That definition, a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that's an accurate definition?
Yes, and yes.
Right on, right on. Succinct like that. There is, before we get to some of your, actually even one quick background question, your work at the Brooklyn Public Library, there's a non-white author. He wrote a piece in the New Republic a decade ago, 2015, time flies. He was specifically addressing racism, and he wrote, often white people are greatly pained. White people are often greatly pained by racism, but rarely are they pained enough. And I've been asking our white guests, you're a white man, certainly you write quite a bit about Central Intelligence Agency and different aspects of racism down through the years, COINTELPRO. You've presumably been around other white people, even write about a few white people. Do you think that there are a sizable number of people classified as white that are often greatly, sincerely pained by racism?
Oh, definitely. In my experience, I've seen people who are, what was the adjective? Sincerely pained? Yes, I think people are sincerely pained that I've come across for sure.
How do the numbers of white people that you've come across that are sincerely and greatly pained by racism, how do they demonstrate that they're often sincerely and greatly pained by racism?
I think, maybe just pivoting to myself, to be self-critical. Like a lot of people I know, sometimes it takes a crisis like the one we're in now for me to reflect on how long and hard and painful our history must have felt for Black Americans. And, also in this new book, I've been trying to focus as well on Native Americans, because that history is also hard. But I think there are times when people like me, allow ourselves to forget the importance of this constant struggle and this constant violence of the system of white supremacy, but also getting defensive when we're challenged about things like that, and I have many people to thank for teaching me how beside the point it is to be defensive, and to listen, and when appropriate to ask questions, and to try not to be defensive where we can be reflective and we can be understanding, and to know that in a moment when it seems like it's quiet, or it seems like it's not necessarily as vicious or active violence, it's still there, it's still happening. And so, yes, I think what I say about myself, I know applies to many people I know, I'm sure.
That's interesting. It's I'm processing your response both on a personal level and then a more collective, individuals classified as white level. The personal, where you said it takes a moment like now, kind of putting that in quotes, it takes a moment like now for you to recognize how much pain there's been as a result, pain, abuse, mistreatment there's been as a result of the system of white supremacy racism. Now, with the question being, are there a sizable number of white people like yourself who are often greatly and sincerely pained by racism? You saying it takes a moment like now to kind of remind you of that, that to me suggests, no, we're not often sincerely pained, that we can kind of forget about this from time to time, and it might take a George Floyd or two to even bring this back. Oh yeah, that is, maybe we should deal with this white supremacy thing. That's one. And then when you were talking about, you've had great teachers who've, told you, hey, don't be defensive. Sometimes you just need to hush, listen,
yes,
receive the feedback. All that's good, but even you said a moment like now, it gives me, whatever that means, it makes me kind of step back and say, whoa, there's a lot of pain with the system of white supremacy and all the rest, with all the pushback and DEI and, hey, we don't have no wokeness at the Smithsonian, we're done with that. And it does not seem like there are a widespread number of people classified as white who are often sincerely and greatly pained by racism. At least it would be difficult for me to point to evidence. Am I being logical? Making sense, Mr. Whitney? He said Joel. Joel, am I being logical?
You are, yes.
Okay. Just checking. Now, before we get to the books, I said I checked. Number one, you make sure I didn't read any bumpkum online. It says that you curate a literary series at the Brooklyn Public Library's BPL Presents on its main stage, and you help present cultural and civic programming throughout the library's 60 branches. Is that true?
That is true.
Wow. Okay. Can we get, that sounds impressive. Can you give us some details what that all entails?
Well, we finished, and I should say I'm speaking because I write these books in my free time on nights and weekends, and I appreciate the indulgence my colleagues often give me to pursue these, or to take days off to do book events and things like that. Obviously I'm speaking on my own behalf. I'm not speaking to represent the library, though I don't expect to say anything that would offend them. So my position, basically, when there are authors with new books coming out, I try to find them a suitable interviewer and put them on stage and let them discuss their own work, much like you're doing right now. But we also have festivals and other things that we do. We have a night in the library that used to be called Night of Ideas, and we have sort of a people's fashion show coming up called the People's Ball, and things like that. So it keeps me very busy, Gus.
Wow, that is fascinating. If I get to Brooklyn, I'm Seattle, so other side of the continent, but have to keep that ticked. It was twofold when I saw this, like, oh, wow, that is amazing. It reminded me, we just had as a guest on our broadcast, Dr. Wayne A. Wiegand, white man. He wrote a phenomenal book, In Silence or Indifference, and it deals with the history of white librarians supporting the system of white supremacy in U.S. public school libraries. Fascinating material. Book was just published last year, and at the end of last year, so it hasn't even really been out that long. Are you aware of this book, In Silence or Indifference?
It sounds familiar. I haven't yet had a chance to read it.
Okay. It is, wow, and it's not just beating up on the South. It talks about the whole country, how white librarians played a very pivotal role in keeping books from black people and being kind of gatekeepers over what books black people got access to. Kind of the same thing that we see now. Whoa, you don't get no woke material now. Put that Carter G. Woodson down. Just, that sort of thing, right, to control their thinking. And Dr. Wiegand, he even said that he's had difficulty getting the book in libraries or getting people to review and that sort of thing. It even seems like it might be continued white supremacy from white librarians, just as a white man in that space. I guess, your colleagues, are there lots of non-white people who are employed who help you do this work at the Brooklyn Public Library?
Absolutely, yeah. It, from the board down to the rank and file staff members like me, I think it's a staff makeup that I think matches Brooklyn's makeup to some degree. And I have seen my colleagues work very hard to push back against things like race-based book bans and other kinds of book bans, and support freedom to read. But I'm aware that history is real, and I am very curious about that book, and I look forward to reading it.
In Silence or Indifference, just published last year. Wow. And white women, that's something I highlight too. The role of white women in maintaining, refining, expanding the system of white supremacy, even explicit, the role of white women in making sure that black people are illiterate. Whew. Okay, that's even in Malcolm X's story. Oh, he's going, I want to be a lawyer. Be no lawyer. Get out of here. We don't take no, get out of here. Okay, with the books specifically, before we get to Flights, that's the newer book. The earlier book that I originally wanted to talk about, maybe if you could just give us a quick teaser, Finks, How the CIA Tricked the World's Best Writers. What exactly is that book about?
Well, yeah, thanks for reaching out originally about that. I'm sorry the timing didn't work out. In some ways, Finks is more, my book than Flights, only in the sense that Flights is made up of essays where I'm reviewing a lot of books. I'm pointing to a lot of other writers. In Finks, there was more original research, and it was much more dense, and it would have taken you much longer to read. But basically, as a founder of a literary magazine back in the day when I was still in writing and journalism and editorial, before my curatorial work at the library, I found a certain generation of white boomer kept telling me that literary magazines were not political, and ours was. We were very much influenced by the violence and racism behind the assumptions that led to the Iraq War, the push for war, everything that came up in the early couple of years of the Bush administration, influenced the magazine as we created it, my co-founders and I. And this sort of pushback that we kept getting, I'm thinking of one of my co-founders' aunts in particular, was that, literary magazines are about literature, they're not about politics, which is absurd in most places in the world. But I soon learned that the gold standard for literary magazines was the Paris Review, and sometime thereafter, I stumbled across an article in the New York Times about how the Paris Review had ties to the CIA, and that got me curious. And so the book is a deep dive about why the CIA was interested in literary magazines, including the Paris Review, and several dozen others. And so I traced writers going in and out of these magazines and how some of them were lied to get them to grace the pages and the covers so that they could make other people think that they were perhaps more liberal than they were. And so to try to get people to read a book about writers, which is considered a no-no for commercial book sales, we want to read about something that's action-based and plot-based and not, picturing someone on the page there inside the book also reading a book. It's considered boring. So to make the book a little bit more interesting, I tried to force a Nobel laureate into each chapter, guys. But along the way, I saw what the CIA was doing through anti-communism. So I should say, given what you've told me about the show and this amazing work that you've been doing, through the lens of Black history, I consider myself a student. I've got a lot to learn from people who've been living Black history much more directly than I have. But I also think it's a challenge that we should take up this quote that has maybe become a cliche: Black history is American history. I take that seriously. And while I was looking at what the CIA was doing, part of my brain was saying, this is a kind of global white supremacy in itself. This anti-communist lens, which is also very capitalist influenced, of course, is a lens through which we can see a very narrow definition of what's pro-American, quote unquote, what's anti-American, quote unquote. And I wanted to see how this affected a multiplicity of writers, including as many famous ones as I could get in there, and see how they fared over the decade and a half or 17 or almost 20 years of this program before the whole program was exposed. The CIA's cultural front was called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. So, it tried to encourage people to work with it, to publish one-off pieces in the magazines that it curated. Some of them were asked to be editors or roving editors. With some open secrecy about it. So I sort of trace everyone from Ernest Hemingway, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the other Nobel laureate, alongside people like James Baldwin, and what these magazine folks thought of people like Pablo Neruda, and how some of the people they may not have liked in public, if they were public figures behind the scenes as editors, they wanted them in their magazines to do certain work. So that's what Finks is about.
Maybe if you were going to try to lure someone to read this maybe slightly denser book that seems like has a lot of interesting information, when you said that you began to look at this campaign of global anti-communism as this is kind of a sort of global white supremacy, kind of through the lens of Finks and some of the figures that you examined, if you were going to explain that to someone who high school dropout, maybe a 17-year-old high school dropout, kind of lowering your vocabulary, how would you explain this pattern that you were seeing, anti-communism as global white supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try. I guess I do sound like a little bit of an egghead sometimes. Sorry about that. But yeah, so I think the idea after World War II were it started as kind of a battle in Europe, and that itself tells you who these Americans in the CIA thought were most important. But in Berlin, which was occupied by some of the countries that were allies, but included the Soviet Union, the Americans saw some of their soldiers actually going into the Soviet quarter of Berlin after the war ended, and they were going there for culture. They were going there for operas and ballet dances. And some of them were trying to say, we want to be sophisticated Americans when we go home, and so we're going over there for culture. So someone got the idea that we, the United States, must beat communism, and we have to do it in part through culture. We need a ministry of culture. But in the era of what soon became the Truman era at the end of the war, and what soon thereafter became the McCarthy era, where everyone was super paranoid about Russians and communism, they didn't have the political sort of will and the consensus to do this through Congress and actually to create a legitimate open ministry of culture. So everything they did through culture, actually to promote American culture, I could say, including promoting writers through these magazines, they did it through the secret budget of the CIA. The CIA had a secret budget, and they saw that as the way we're going to get around the McCarthyites and the right-wingers who don't believe in culture, the people they thought of as like Philistines or not very sophisticated people in the Congress, and they said, we can do this with the CIA's secret budget. So they started using these magazines to say, well, we don't just have tanks and hamburgers in the United States. We also have great American inventions that are cultural, like jazz. We have great abstract expressionist painters. We have Hemingway, and of course, we have Hollywood. So that's kind of what the book is about.
Wow. I think I got a little bit better understanding now. And for listeners, so wacky, some of this is directly in Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. Are you familiar? Did you see that Academy Award nominated documentary just came out last year?
I sure did. I thought it was incredible.
I did too. I saw it 3 times, Malcolm X on the big screen, and I've been talking about that film for a year, but that information is right there. I think that might have been what motivated me to reach out to you about Finks, because I saw that film early at the film festival. It might have been that film. Anywho, before we move on to Flights, connected with the film Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which is so intimately related to so much of the content in both of your books, I would say, George Plimpton, and with timing, his name has popped up recently. The passing of heavyweight champion George Foreman. I have seen Rumble in the Jungle mentioned every day. George Plimpton, white journalist, was one of those in the press corps and covered and wrote just pages and pages and pages about his time in Kinshasa with Muhammad Ali and George Foreman for the Rumble. He's one of the figures in your book. How was George Plimpton, white journalist, how was he manipulated, employed, utilized by the CIA?
Well, he may, he's a big question mark for me. I think one interesting thing that I do know from my reporting in the book is how he got into boxing, and that was through Hemingway. Now, how did he get involved in a CIA magazine? The CIA magazine in question is the Paris Review. It still exists, so I told the story of people around that magazine while, telling the story of other CIA magazines that have since been exposed and therefore died off. But the Paris Review survived all that. And it was founded by another pretty well-known white American writer named Peter Matheson, who died a decade after Plimpton. But he was the original founder, and he was a CIA counterintelligence officer in Paris when they all had the idea to found it. And one of the sort of unsung co-founders of the Paris Review is James Baldwin. He was in conversations in Paris with another sort of named co-founder, Doc Humes, another white writer from the Ivy Leagues, as was Plimpton and Matheson. But after they were well along in their planning, Matheson called Plimpton over, and the way Plimpton has always told the story, he didn't know Matheson was undercover CIA till much, much later, and Doc Humes wanted him to tell the story in '66 to clear their name, and he should have taken his advice, because it came out about a decade later, and people haven't stopped talking about it, including writers like me. But so then, if you look at what Plimpton did while Matheson was a CIA agent, it looks like the kind of work Plimpton was doing, and he was State Department adjacent, I have to say, like Plimpton's dad. Even if Plimpton was never a member of the CIA, and some people have said he was a, quote, agent of influence. I don't know what that means, Gus. But his dad was part of the UN diplomatic corps as Adlai Stevenson was making the case for the Bay of Pigs. And throughout this time, one of the things that Plimpton wanted to do as a writer was to be like Papa. That was Hemingway's nickname. So he's chasing Hemingway from Paris to Spain. He goes running with the bulls with Hemingway. And he sort of came up with this idea through a couple of other less well-known journalists, apart from Hemingway, but also through Hemingway. He sees Hemingway writing these great big articles and novels about bullfighting and about the war and about this heroic physical activities around sport. And Hemingway, of course, is getting into boxing. So I did a deep dive. One of the chapters is sort of like told the quest for Hemingway, who was a prize for the CIA guys that I'm thinking about. Like, first of all, getting the Paris Review Hemingway interview was a great get for them, and it took Plimpton a long time. It took him going to Cuba, which was still very controversial, and after 58, when he goes there after the Cuban Revolution comes to power. So Plimpton becomes known as the Paris Review editor, the face of the Paris Review, a very charming guy who went on to do TV commercials and stuff. But he was also, throughout that whole time, chasing people like Hemingway. And what I reported, I think, for the first time, was that a lot of the famous Paris Review interviews with big Nobel Prize-winning writers like that were then sold to dozens of other CIA magazines as soft power interviews that were translated into those languages where those interviews were then published. And, he became a maven of boxing, and I have him in my Malcolm X chapter because he was so important in Finks. I wanted to sort of go back to him. And what does he do? He sort of discredits the Nation of Islam. He sort of says, it's riddled with anti-Semitism. He did like to make fun of even characters that he liked, but he has Malcolm popping mints into his mouth, and he doesn't take him as seriously as I might have, as he often did with writers, with figures that he liked. But he gets this into shadow boxes, his interactions with Malcolm X over Malcolm X's quest in Miami to bring Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali, into the Nation of Islam's fold. Partly, as I tell it in Flights, partly to sort of help end the feud with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But we can get into that whenever you're ready.
Right. You link the two books beautifully. Plimpton is in the book. He got to speak to Minister Malcolm X. As I said, he was in Kinshasa to cover the rumble in the jungle. And wow. Last tidbit, and then we can jump right to Flights. Thank you for indulging me, Joel. Richard Wright, author of Native Son and Black Boy, Victim of White Supremacy, Chicago, although he migrated, Great Migration. But Richard Wright pops up in the book. How did the CIA try to utilize Richard Wright?
It's a story that I tell a little bit of in Finks and have learned more since because from one of my next projects I'm writing about Indonesia. And I think what we see in the great novel of Richard Wright's, one of the great novels, Native Son, we see writing after he's had a falling out with socialism and communism. And we see that through the characters, these rich white champagne socialists in the novel who bring him, he's the driver for the family, and there's a rich white daughter who brings him on a mission to sort of explore Harlem and sort of experience it from this kind of left-wing, almost touristic way. And she gets very drunk, and we all know the story of Native Son, but he tells it kind of in his anti-communist, post-communist phase. He sort of looks at the insincerity maybe of these socialists who are trying to recruit our main character, Bigger Thomas. But the way he comes into this cultural CIA, the cultural Cold War, is what one scholar has called it, is he gets, I don't know, I think maybe recruited is too strong a word, but he starts to have conversations with editors who do a book, The God That Failed. Wright, I think, puts an essay in that book about his falling out with communism, why and how it happened. And soon he finds himself in this network that I trace throughout the book around the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Now, one thing that you'll see in the book that I didn't write a ton about because I didn't really feel qualified yet, but one of the many cultural lenses that the CIA wanted to penetrate is Black radicalism. And so most of the tone of the Congress for Cultural Freedom and its associated cultural fronts. They penetrated student movements, they penetrated labor, anywhere where there could be rumors or facts that Soviet communists might penetrate. Whether they had hard evidence or not, they would preemptively penetrate those organizations. And along those lines, they wanted to they basically wanted to create a left that was explicitly anti-communist, even if they could concede some left-wing or liberal, red meat to these groups. And they wanted them as the new left is rising, they really wanted them to sound left-wing more than they actually were, in my opinion, from my research. So they founded something called the Association for the American Society for African Culture. And so a lot of the actually left-wing conferences in Europe in the 50s and 60s were spearheaded by writers who were thinking in international and global terms, everyone from Aimé Césaire to Jean-Paul Sartre, and they were founding magazines working together on anti-colonial, nationalist, and sovereignty-based issues. And so the CIA starts AMSAC, as it comes to be known, the American Society for African Culture, another CCF, if you will, to try to curate the same kind of thing, sort of an anti-communist, but hopefully liberal, black sort of cultural org. And so they basically went to Richard Wright, because he was reliably anti-communist, to ask him a lot of advice, to ask him to head up some of these counter conferences that they formed. And the relationship kind of went on from there throughout the 50s. And what I've since read about is he was also invited and sent on a CIA dime. The Congress for Cultural Freedom sent him to write a piece for one of the CIA magazines, Encounter, about the non-aligned movement, particularly in Bandung on Java in 1955. So, in other words, the anti-colonial nations are meeting to say, we don't want to be with the Russians, we don't want to be with the Americans. One of these conferences is 1955 in Indonesia on Java, and they send Richard Wright to write about it. And I think they were expecting him to criticize it. I mean, he was sort of critical of it, but the CIA was kind of footing the bill and hoping that he'd be critical of it because of where he was with regard to his anti-communism.
Wow. I am just, wow. This is the Bandung Conference, 1955, that you're talking about, where they sent Richard Wright to, hopefully he's going to be critical, and they don't know what they're talking about, and this is not, was it a different conference?
No, that was the one, yeah.
Okay. Wow. Just wow. I mean,
I know.
Wow.
But the amazing thing is he saw by 1960 when he dies, I mean, there are stories, including Hugh Wilford, who writes one of the other great books about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and he has a whole chapter on this American Society for African Culture. He's a respectable so-called, academic white man, universities in Southern California. He's from England, and he leaves the question of rumors that the CIA or somebody like that had Richard Wright killed. He leaves that open in his book, which I found interesting. Richard Wright at the end is saying, I haven't changed my position about communism, which, he was still anti, but I have changed my position about anti-communism because he saw this group that he was supposed to be one of, as he said, trying to stick knives in my back. So he was very critical of these movements around the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the so-called cultural CIA. And he's outspoken in Europe against them right before he dies. And Hugh Wilford has left it open to conspiracy theorizing of whether and how, like his death was mysterious, and he says that in his book.
Wow, Hugh Wilford, I'll have to check this book out like immediately. I just want to. This is another one for Black brothers. They had an article in the paper today about how they do not allow black males to go to college and that sort of thing. Like Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice, black dudes, real bad. So for the black dudes who dropped out, thrown out, all the rest in school, and don't have a thesaurus, would it be accurate to say that Richard Wright at this time, he kind of understood some of these white people who are saying that they are not racist and saying that they're liberal or progressive or communist or socialist or whatever? We're down with the black people. We were there for Scottsboro and all that. And wait a minute, they're just saying that they're anti-communist, but they're still practicing racism and mistreating me, knives in the back. Is that an accurate reinterpretation?
Yeah, I think if I understand what you're saying, absolutely. He saw that there was this maybe weaponization of his politics and his usefulness in a way that didn't make them any more decent to him or any more egalitarian towards him, I think is how I would put it. And one of the things he complained about, very much like what's going on now with Trump, he said that there were influences in Europe, A, spying on him, and B, making it very difficult for any of the maybe organizations that wanted to hire black people. He felt like there were some kind of secret, maybe intelligence-based forces pushing against that and getting black folks fired in Europe. And he was suspicious of where that was coming from. So I think, based on what I think I understood your characterization and your comparison to me, absolutely, he was kind of the way he sounds, it almost felt like he was sort of used and thrown out.
I'm really alert about metaphors, but that was accurate. Knives in the back. Wow.
Yeah, and that one was his. Yeah, that was his. He definitely said that specific thing.
Much obliged.
And Malcolm has. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Malcolm has a great metaphor where he says, he's questioning the word progress, and he says, if you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and then pull it out 3, that's not progress.
For sure. Maybe they didn't even pull it out with Richard Wright. I mean, wow, that is, yeah, wow. Have to thank you for indulging me. Finks, see, that was the reason why I was intrigued by that one first. But we arrived here today with Flights, Radicals on the Run. This is way more recent, 2023. Now, who was the intended audience for Flights? Was this an academic book? Was this a general population book? Who was the person you were saying is going to sit down and read Flights?
That's a great question. I think I was trying to actively broaden the audience that most evidence for audience is anecdotal. But Finks, I was aware I had a lot of information I wanted to work in there. Very kind-hearted interviewers in the past have pushed back when I've used the word dense, but I think, I try to make it very readable, but it's chock full of good research. With Flights, I was trying to write essays that supported and filled in some of the gaps. And I'll give you one example, Gus. Sometimes I report through Freedom of Information requests, which is, a government, based on a law that journalists or ordinary citizens can write to the government and insist on records pertaining to their activity in whatever field. And I had requested some of those while I was still writing Finks. And if you don't have budget for a lawsuit to try to speed it up by suing the government, especially the CIA, you often have to wait 2 years for people who have long departed this world. And one couple in particular, poets called George and Mary Oppen, who are in the book. I don't know if that's not the first one chronologically, but maybe the first one I wrote after Finks. So Flights includes essays that have been published in other magazines, and a lot of times the editors of those magazines are helping me shape the essays to their audiences. But as I do those essays, one common one was Jacobin, which is a democratic socialist magazine. And it tries to be a magazine for kind of a younger left. It tries to be global. I've never actually seen any data around their audience, but I was thinking in those terms. I was trying to write without too much left-wing jargon, even when considering a piece for Jacobin. But the audience question is one that always intrigues me. And a lot of these essays after Finks, I was very aware of Black Lives Matter. I was very, very aware of the Standing Rock protests. And I wanted to learn more. And so sometimes with essays in particular, I mean, I guess with Finks too, with a full narrative with so many chapters and so much rich research. But with flights, I write to learn. You know, sometimes I just get so busy that I can read a book and forget it. So if I write something about it, and I write to my obsessions, which definitely there's a lot of surveillance, there's a lot of counterintelligence program, there's a lot of, you know, what happens in Finks, that's the equivalent of the counterintelligence program, is something called Operation Chaos by the CIA, where they're penetrating the media. They're trying to get all the coverage to reflect well in the United States, even doing illegal things. The CIA is not supposed to operate in the United States domestically. So I continued the project, but instead of making it an institutional history, which is to say a history of anti-communism and the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the CIA, I wanted to tell the story through characters, through their lives, through their biographies. So I watched a lot of films, I read some biographies, and I tried to make timely essays so these editors would have an excuse to publish them. So the audience is a kind of a hodgepodge of left-wing journals that were willing to publish me on history and sometimes on Black liberation. And I got, as I was writing more, I got into Central American politics around the Maya uprising and the dirty wars that the Americans sponsored down there. But yeah, I mean, going back to the stirring things you say, like this global white supremacy, it crops up in all these characters' lives. You know, the thing that I was trying to frame it through also was a metaphor of flights. I watched these characters get chased across borders, out of print, through censorship, and in many cases, unfortunately, into an early grave. So that's kind of flights.
For sure, metaphor is quite strong throughout the text. I guess before I get to Lorraine Hansberry, that's one of the folks who were just talking about Chicago 2 times. Even Abraham Bolden's book is very Chicago heavy. Dr. Welsing, you know, all that. Anyway, you write kind of at the early part of the book, journalist, white man, James Reston, and then you have it in parentheses that it later came out that he had connections to the CIA. I said, wait a minute, what? What? And I was looking, there wasn't a footnote per se. Maybe I'm slow and lame that I hadn't seen this before. We've seen the name James Reston currently related to some of our current studies. What details have been revealed that show Mr. Reston is related to the CIA?
Oh no, I should have looked that up before I got here. You know, when the book was going to print, since it was just such a small parenthetical, and this book was more essays than deep research like Finks. You're right. I let that parenthetical stand alone without a footnote. And so as the book was going to print, I said, "Why? Wait, do I have that right? Do I have the right guy at the Times?" And I looked him back up, and sure enough, there were allegations that a lot of the stuff where I tie mainstream journalists, so-called, to the CIA, a lot of it's in a really incredible article by the famous All the King's Men author, Carl Bernstein, who was, one of the 2 famous Woodward and Bernstein duo, whose great book, who helped take down Nixon, to be frank, but whose book became the great movie with Robert Redford, right, and Dustin Hoffman. Bernstein found in his reporting, the CIA and the media was the name of the article. It ran in Rolling Stone in 1977. And he found a lot of mainstream journalists at CBS. Some of them were executives. Some of them were in the opinion section. Some of them were other kinds of senior editors. They had secrecy agreements with the CIA to debrief, to keep the CIA posted on what kinds of stories were coming. And it expanded globally to where they had, in their telling, this is a different article also. This one was actually in the New York Times, also in 1977 by John Crudson. They had a journal on every capital in the world where they could get a story they liked to run, and they could get a story they didn't like killed. So between these two articles, and I think it was Bernstein, that's where I learned about James Reston having one of these secrecy agreements with the CIA.
Wow, that is staggering. And that's the second time this month we've had a white author on the program talking about CIA and or FBI programs where a major component is lying in mainstream media. And what he just said, we can either report story, lie that we want to promote. We have people favorable, maybe employees, whatever. We can get that report in the newspaper and or something we don't want published, maybe even something that's true, but we don't want it published. Got people who can make sure that happens as well. Wow. All over the world. Wow. And even now, how do I know that name James Reston, and why is that important? Well, for one, Jonestown. Anyway, Lorraine Hansberry, we've been talking about her bunches. I so appreciated these details. This is kind of bottom of 25, beginning of 26, where you write, in the spring of 1937, Carl Hansberry, that's her dad, bought a house in the South Side neighborhood of Woodlawn, expecting a legal battle. The house at 6140 South Rhodes Avenue was just inside the white section, in quotes, enforced by restrictive covenants, of course. One day, the family bodyguard saw a crowd outside. He led Lorraine and her sister, Mamie, inside, and that's when they threw this huge piece of mortar, Mamie recalls, in sighted eyes, feeling heart. That mortar lodged in the wall and just missed Lorraine, who was 7. Can you imagine? Like she could have been killed. As Perry notes on screen, it's in that moment, Imani Perry, author, that she recognizes that notwithstanding her family's prosperity, she was still going to be subjected to racial violence like every other black American. Hansberry recalled, my desperate and courageous mother patrolling our house all night with a loaded German Luger, doggedly guarding her 4 children. Footnote there. These battles were not unique. There were literally hundreds of cases across the Midwest of white mob violence in response to individual efforts to integrate. Perry writes, the consequences were destroyed property, lost homes, trauma, and sometimes death. While in the South, racial apartheid meant segregated public transportation and lynching. Up north, real estate was the border of racial status. And I'll stop there, direct quote as well. Give lots of praise to Miss Perry and her writing. Whoopee, biographies are great. But I thought this was so important. Even one, there are not too many instances where you have black self-defense celebrated, where black people having guns to protect their own lives. Like, whoa. Even today, Philando Castile, whoa, you might get killed for that sort of thing. And then here even, you have a black female. Women's History Month, how about that? With a German Luger to protect her household and children. Like, what? I think that's such a great anecdote, and I think this component of Lorraine Hansberry's life frequently gets overlooked. They just skip all this, and let's just get right to Raisin in the Sun. Why did you think it was important to include this?
Well, there's private obsessions, one of which I already confessed, and that was one of the kinds. I try to find multiple flights, quote unquote, in each essay, and that flying brick, that flying American mob violence, that to me was just haunting. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and it was in Monty Perry's text and the documentary Cited, Eyes, Feeling Heart, in which she and others, including Lorraine's sister, speak about it. But it's exactly like you said. She was so young, and, you know, it just gives you a window into the enormity of racial violence, and how, by, you know, the luck of however she ducked or however badly it was thrown, it missed her. And we got, you know, even though she died pretty young, we got the amazing mind and heart of Imani into the, of Lorraine, into the tradition, what Imani calls the tradition. I just listened to a podcast with Imani Perry, and she talks about the tradition that's personal, the race conversations and other important, intimate conversations she has with her kids and other family members, but also her understanding through her scholarship and through Black storytelling of the tradition of Black letters and arts. And so that was just a piece of her brilliance, and the sort of the official biography of Lorraine hitting me. And it has to do with this question that Lorraine was critical of respectability. Like, her father did things, quote unquote, the right way. He fought in the courts, you know, he did it the respectable way. And yet he takes the other kind of flight, which is so undersung. We always talk about Americans fleeing to Canada, whether it's enslaved people running away from that system of violence, or people leaving when a Republican is elected, liberals leaving. So much of the flight from the United States actually went in the other direction, south, including a lot of enslaved people, which there was a great scholarly book about a couple years ago. But her parents go to Mexico to escape this. They didn't feel like they were making it. They fought the good fight. They went to the Supreme Court. They sort of had a half victory, but they didn't really see progress. So they left, and they made that other flight across the border.
Wow, she does die young, 34, Miss Hansberry. Have you seen, have you read, seen the play, movie, Raisin in the Sun?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen the play, I've seen the movie, and watched it again as I was writing this.
Okay. Great Sidney Poitier in the play and one of the film versions. I've said we've been talking about this play and Lorraine Hansberry quite a bit of late, and you include kind of how all this comes together and some of the racism that they encountered. They wanted to get rid of some of the Negro jive talk in the play en route to getting all this to stage and such. I didn't know about that. I thought that was great to include. When we talked about this play before, and I said, I think some people, some audience folk, or I guess however if they read it or if they see it, I think some people might perceive the villain in Raisin in the Sun to be Walter Lee Younger, who is the, I guess, main black male character portrayed by Sidney Poitier at times, who takes the family money and gives it to a different black dude who runs off. They're going to start a liquor store against his mother's wishes. They take the money they got from their father dying, the insurance money, $10,000. He takes it, supposed to pay for his sisters going to med school, and the family's going to move into, much like Lorraine Hansberry, going to move into a White House and rise on up. And instead, he gives it away to this black dude who runs off and almost bankrupts the family. Do you think it's possible that some audience members might see Walter Lee Younger as the villain in Raisin in the Sun?
I think it's very possible. I can't help. I'm trying to read August Wilson's Century Cycle through, not through the order in which he wrote them, but through the order in which they appear historically. So I'm rereading Piano Lesson, and I look at that moment in Hansberry, Raisin in the Sun, as like when you see conflict between characters who in both cases are related, like the brother in the Piano Lesson, who comes up to try to buy land, and he really wants to sell the piano, and his sister doesn't want him to. And you feel this tension throughout, and it's not, to me, that's not a villain character. That's a character that's like, he's needling. It's a character that's like creating the same conflict that makes the narrative great. It makes the story go. But I wouldn't put it past audiences to think about it in all kinds of different ways. I happen to be, someone who writes about books and plays and sometimes films. So I don't see Walter as a villain at all, but I see it as a sort of a tragic mistake,
Indeed. And I process that because I've seen the play, I've read the play a few times, and I think it is very possible that numerous audience members, white and non-white, might see that play and think that Walter Lee Younger is the villain. And I certainly think more so than a racist white person, because there's really only one white person that you see, and he is so, what shall I say, bumbling, stumbling, inept, feeble, like that. He certainly doesn't seem like one of those white mob members who almost killed a young Lorraine Hansberry with that brick of mortar. So I don't think most viewers would think of him as the villain. It just doesn't, with what we heard from her childhood, that is not conveyed in Raisin in the Sun. The one white racist is so meek and timid and, well, you're really going to move? Aw, shucks. Well, okay. And he goes out on, ain't no, what? Wait till I get this. We're going to, like, there's none of that. And I just feel like it is good. The white racism is minimized so much. You might think the problem is Walter Lee Younger. As someone who writes and analyzes plays, am I making sense, Joel?
Yeah, you're making sense, and you're making me think of, that place where we started, the debate within Black. We could look at Black liberation movements as having a lot of nodes, a lot of characters, a lot of people with different ideas, and the way the minister Malcolm X lays out some of his, I don't want to say scorn, but some of his criticism that is often made comical and satirical. The way he lays that out, what we're seeing is, and this is the through line through some of what we're talking about, and if we get to the Malcolm X the essay and flights, it's the conversation about tactics. Everybody wants liberation. Everybody wants, everybody with a certain maybe moral education wants racism to end. It affects us all. And as a white person, I know it holds all of us back, even white people. It's that great quote, which is not fully accurate, but black men's bodies, white men's souls. Racism is bad for white people, and we don't know it. But what these intellectuals are looking at, and what Lorraine is very interested in, is the debate, and what Peniel Joseph is looking at in his side-by-side biography of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, the discussion over tactics.
The cows. Joel Whitney discussing, we talked about Finks, but discussing flights now. I guess specifically with tactics, and I didn't see this in the text unless I missed it. I know Minister Malcolm X was very critical of Lorraine Hansberry for her marrying Robert Nimroff, a white man, and she even gave him some pretty strong pushback about being publicly excoriated about her being with a white man. Did you see criticism? I know you talk about this with Paul Robeson and some of the other individuals in the book. Did you see where she encountered problems, Lorraine Hansberry, because she was married to a white man?
I didn't see in the book that I was reviewing, as you said, was Imani Perry's biography of Lorraine, and I was looking at that film, and I felt like there was an undercurrent of that, maybe in one or the other, but I didn't see deep reporting as I was writing this on that, and I'm not surprised that it was there, but no, that wasn't the focus, and I don't have that in this essay.
Gotcha. You do include when she and a number of other, Harry Belafonte, a number of other black, what shall I say, activists, entertainers, conglomerate, they go and they convene with Robert Kennedy, kind of talk about some of their, what shall I say, displeasure with the rate of replacing white supremacy with justice, and why haven't you all done more? You being the federal government, Robert Kennedy, President Kennedy at the time, why haven't you all done more to stop all of this violent mob violence as we've talked about? And he said, hey, man, why are you all getting upset? You ought to be more appreciative, and we're the best friend that you black people got. I'm kind of paraphrasing all of it. In fact, I'll stop there and make sure, am I paraphrasing? Am I doing justice to all of this in a haphazard way?
No, that's what I think of when I read that scene, and I actually have it, and I have a tiny bit of it in my Baldwin chapter in Finks, and I wanted to put more in, but I was aware that I was going long, as I tend to do, Gus, in Finks, so I trimmed it back. So when I got the chance to write about Lorraine, who was there, I started the essay with that, because what it shows you is this, I don't know, it's become a kind of a cliche term, but the idea is something, we talked about from the beginning of this conversation, the white fragility, the white defensiveness that, is in a lot of us. And I've definitely been guilty of that. And you see that in the Attorney General, the president's brother, who's convened a meeting with black intellectuals and civil rights concerned actors and luminaries. And he does it through Baldwin. And one of the first person Baldwin reaches out to is Lorraine. And the conversation turns because a young activist who's been beaten in the South, he's been beaten, is coming to New York for treatment. And somebody brings him along, I forget who, it might have been Lorraine. But when he speaks first to criticize the Kennedys for not taking this more seriously, and I think he also pivots to their initial impulse to get behind the war in Vietnam, and he criticizes that. And Robert Kennedy just abruptly ends the meeting. And Imani Perry nails this. I've read several versions of it, but Imani's is great. And that's all I could think about is this powerful man who has invited these people just ends the meeting. And it really ends on Lorraine doing what she said she wanted to do, which was to be an amplifier of the black working class and the black struggle rather than a figurehead. So this idea of celebrity was losing interest in her, to her rather. And Jerome Smith, I think is his name, the injured activist who was there, who was criticizing Kennedy maybe a little too directly. Apparently Kennedy looked around and sort of looked past the kid, and kind of the way Imani describes it is, I'll talk to all of you who are civilized, but not to this kid. And Lorraine said, no, you've got to listen to him. He's on the front lines. He's trying to, help raise the awareness that would give you the political cover, perhaps, to do this work, to do this kind of explicit fighting. Because the Kennedys, up until that point, were trying to be very quiet about civil rights because they were worried that they would lose re-election in the South. So it ends pretty much with Lorraine saying, pay attention to this guy, and Kennedy just getting all butthurt. Now, it's worth being fair and saying about a month later, apparently Robert got the right message to his brother, and his brother was watching these things. And the big speech, I'm forgetting the exact date, I think in May of that meeting, we could look it up, but I think it's June 11th, 63, not very long after that, Kennedy makes a very grand speech on this, and he uses Lorraine's framing that it's a moral issue of our moment, not just a political question or a question that might affect his reelection. So that really stuck with me, thanks to how great Imani Perry is.
Right on from Miss Perry, gets another shout out. I would have to go and get my dates. I say strive for accuracy. That's why I was curious about the footnote for Mr. Reston having CIA connections. But I suspect that Kennedy speech about it being a moral issue with racism because of the timing, it may have been in response to the assassination of Medgar Evers, which was on June 12, 1963. I have to go back and double check, but it's very close. If it's not in response to that, it's like within a day, hours, because it's, right same time period. I just wanted to hop back really quick before I got to the part about Robert Kennedy's response, or even the entire Kennedy administration at this point, 63, their response, because we heard some of Minister Malcolm X's critiques, also a character in Flights, critiques of JFK at the beginning of the broadcast, but I wanted to just rewind. As a white man, Joel Whitney, how has racism held you back? Like, are there specific things that you have not been able to do, or specific problems that you have encountered because you are a white man in a system of white supremacy racism?
Well, I think a lot of it has to be in the realm of psychology. You know, it probably, to be blunt and not as wordy as I've been, it deadens whole parts of my humanity. It helps quash my empathy. That's, I think, what it does most broadly to white people. It normalizes violence and things that any child who sees them would be traumatized by. So it sort of normalizes trauma. And I don't mean to compare that to what it does to Black people in the sense of any kind of equivalence. But I do think it's you know, my father was the son of a Jungian psychologist. Both of them were very concerned about this, and so I think because my grandfather, who I never met, was a shrink, sometimes I see it through that lens of like, what are the effects of this? If you see, if someone sees someone they care about do something so callous, if you were related, again, we have to see this first through Lorraine's eyes, that mortar and brick coming at her and her family. We have to see it that way first. White people have to force themselves to and to fight for that knowledge and empathy. But also, if you were a little kid who, let's say, would naturally be friends with their neighbors, and then you see your parent do something that awful, and you have to understand. I mean, Hansberry calls some of the white moderation, I think she called the white liberals, a sign of corruption. And at the end of my essay on her, I quote this wonderful moment where she's doing a TV debate with some liberals and maybe even a conservative. And she says, we need to find a way to convince the white American liberal to become an American radical. And you know, that word actually means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And we're hearing AOC currently try to reclaim it. But I just imagine sometimes the first moment, not exclusively, this is not my only lens through these kinds of stories and these kinds of essays and research. I'm always trying to find how it affects the central characters, the central people. If it's racism, we're talking about how it affects Black people first and foremost. But how it affects a young white kid to see a relative or a family member or a friend do something that violent and outrageous. It must affect your trust. It must affect your sense of who you are. It must and should create a crisis of identity, I would think.
Is there, I guess before I proceed, is there anything else on the list in terms of specific problems that you have encountered as a result of being a white man in a system of white supremacy racism, things that you've not been able to do, things that you have been held back from doing that are constructive? Is anything else on the list?
Well, probably I'm missing a whole bunch of things, and I guess I should probably think about this some more. But you know, feel I mean, I guess another big one is shame and guilt that you know transforms us. But you know, nothing else is coming to mind, to be honest with you.
Okay, that I do appreciate that at the end. To be honest, nothing else coming to mind. Wow, I was going to play my buckets of words sound effect, but I can't even do that. And I even, before I get to my full, you said your grandfather was a shrink, meaning a psychiatrist. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Drapetomania, pausing just for the long history in so many ways that we've talked about. White people like your grandfather practicing white supremacy racism, and I mean in a very powerful and widespread manner that had generational impact on black people. Protest psychosis, so many. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and talking about her reception with the American Medical Association, and talk about that in so many different ways. But wow, that's the type of thing that I would even think about when I say, now, because I've heard that from white people, where white people will say, white people are victims of racism. We're all victims of racism. White fragility. Racism holds white people back too. All of that is white people deliberately and willfully practicing racism. Now, the big part of the miss in terms of how this is white people willfully practicing racism, if white people are committed, as my definition says, if white people are dedicated to white supremacy racism, they're doing what they intend. There is no shame about this. There is no guilt about this. I'm not even missing out on my humanity, because my full expression of white humanity is me mistreating Negroes. And white people have said this. Fortunate people like your granted drapetomania, see, you Negroes, you got some type of problem with your brain computer. You don't want to be whipped by a white man. You trying to flee. That should have been in the book. Trying to get off the plantation. We're going to call that drapetomania. Yes. We'll tie you up and lash you and put that in the DSM-4 type of a thing. Man. And the other component, that's huge. That's really, you can stop right there with a list in terms of why all of that is white people lying and willfully practicing racism, because they don't feel bad about all this. They would have stopped all this a long time ago. They don't even think about it. He said at the beginning, they have to be reminded, oh man, that's right, the Negroes are we are George Floyding them up, see? And then even sometimes when they do get reminded, they say, we're done with the wokeness. They get defensive. He said that too. That's why so much to that is a willful lie. And then the other part where they say we're held back, and you say, how? They can't even get anything tangible. It's like, well, psychologically, I think, and we got missing out on my humanity and empathy, and even that about what happens to a white child and all that. Now, I don't think white people want to be friends with black people. We went through this. They have studies about this. White people do not want to be friends with black people. That's not on their list of humanity bucket list. None of that. If that's all we got on the list of how we're held back, woo, man. Any hoodles. And that's the sort of thing, I'll hear that white people are way more comfortable talking about allegedly how they're held back by racism, as opposed to what are some of the ways that you practice racism. Let's get a live test. Joel, as a white man, what are some of the ways that you have practiced white supremacy racism?
Well, I think I'm hearing what you're saying, first of all, and I'm trying to really listen. Ways that I've practiced it. Now, I mean, I'm in this system where that is the working ethos of it, and I feel crappy about it every day, and I have throughout my life. And how do I practice it? Let me think about that. I can tell by how underwhelmed you were by my last answer that I'm not sure I'm going to hit the nail on the head necessarily with this one. But, I mean, I think there are passive and active ways where my racism is something that's in me by tradition of white supremacy that operates all around me, that I was born into and have never done enough to stop. I'm in a two-party system where the range of things that I can do to try to change the system go from voting to often pretty lame parties, increasingly lame after Citizens United on one side, to getting out and protesting. And so I think a lot of the ways that I practice white supremacy are by not knowing enough, not being active enough and curious enough, by getting defensive when people call me out for stuff. And I'm going by Ibram Kendi's definition of I'm not always as active as an anti-racist as I should be. But I think there are other ways where I've seen shortcomings in my family and people I love, and I haven't been active and spoken out. But yeah, those are the ones that come to mind. Yes.
That's about what I thought. Let's see. Have you heard any racist jokes, Joel?
Yeah, and I was taught not to laugh, and I was always sort of appreciative of my parents who told me, we don't do that. We don't talk like that. We don't tell those jokes. So when I heard them in school, I squirmed.
What sort of racist jokes do you remember? Like one of the racist jokes that you heard growing up?
Don't.
That's part of the pattern as well. But I at least appreciate. Did you hear more than 20 of these racist jokes growing up? Is this in Peekskill, New York, that we're talking about?
That's correct.
Okay, he has that in the book for listeners.
I would say it must have been more than 20. I think, as I was trying to say before, I think I probably felt a lot of shame when I heard them. And none of them is coming to mind right now.
That's another one where I have tremendous pushback in terms of white people, even in fact because of the popularity of the jokes. We've spoken to so many white people from all over the world where they have said, and no hemming and hawing, oh yeah, Gus, I've heard bunches of racist jokes. We've had white people who sometimes they say, I've heard hundreds. We've even had some white people who said, I heard thousands of them, Gus T. They're a little bit older. They don't share, because even the people who said they've heard thousands consistently, they don't share. That's one. And the other thing, the jokes are so popular. This is for generations. This is going, they got books. Abraham Lincoln loved a good Negro joke. And it just goes on and on and on. That Nixon's piano. That's what we got that on the shelf. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, white man. That's how the book starts, with Richard Nixon and the beloved minstrel shows that they have been carrying on in Washington, D.C. for generations. And these are some of the most powerful white people in the world. Let's get blackface and do old, Sambo jig and sing Mammy and like, what? That right, that nothing about that suggests shame. If for generations, what we love, they got this in books talking about data. Racist jokes, mostly about black people, are searched on par with the L.A. Lakers. Now, you can think about that any generation. And this is on NPR. You can think about that any generation. Magic Johnson to Luka. Racist jokes. Kobe, Lakers. They got that report, the L.A. County Sheriff, where they took Kobe Bryant's remains and was swapping them like Negro jokes. They had a multi-million-dollar suit about that. But all of that, where is the guilt? Even what I just said. They took Kobe Bryant's corpse, charred remains, L.A. County Sheriff, and were out at the bar. Look at this. Just like lynching photographs. What about that suggests shame, guilt, sadness about black people being, if anything, I've said because they're so popular, it suggests that white people, they really enjoy violence and harm against black people. They joke about it. That's a lot of the racist jokes. I don't know if you recall. Do you remember hearing racist jokes that were making violence against black people was funny? Do you remember anything suggesting that?
Violence, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, just the dehumanization itself is violent, and all of them dehumanized.
Okay.
A lot of it was based on stereotype, caricatures.
I had to pick out, because you were talking about Lorraine Hansberry and all of her activism and purchasing a station wagon for James Chaney and those two white boys who were killed, Freedom Summer, 1964. I didn't even know that, she had pitched in to get them a wagon and all the rest of it in the short time that she was on the planet before she passed away. She married Robert Nimroff. You have him in the book, White Man. A number of activists, I don't know, victims, non-white people that were active in so-called civil rights at this time. They were married to white people. Dr. Maya Angelou, she married a number of white men. Leroy Jones married to a white woman, and he even thought about this as a contradiction himself, and ended up getting divorce, changing his Mary Baraka's name change and all the rest of it. It's quite a few. I could go on. Do you see that as how can you be a so-called radical black person fighting against racism and you are married to a white person? Do you see that as a contradiction?
That's not something I've thought about in those terms before. I think I've thought about it in terms of if it's not a contradiction for that black person, then no.
Fascinating.
But if it is, and they realize it later, then absolutely.
Okay.
In other words, it's not my subjective experience,
I see. Have you heard that gets suggested as one of the ways that we will get rid of racism, white supremacy as a total system is by non-white people and white people having sexual intercourse and or even producing children together? Have you heard that suggested as that's how we'll eventually get rid of racism?
Yeah, I heard a high school history teacher say that, a white history teacher say that.
Wow, that's wacky. Did he get fired? Now, I bet he'd get DEI out of the school so fast now. Did he get fired or in trouble?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Dang, that is crazy. Do you think that's true, accurate? Any veracity, logic in that way of thinking?
Just procreating? No, I think we have to face it. I think we all have to face it. I don't think that shortcut works, in my view.
I see. You include the Conference of Negro Writers. We talked about a little bit before. That the CIA had set up a sponsoring organization, the American Society of African Culture, to counter the black radicalism, and you suggest that Hansberry almost certainly did not know about any of this. Are you pretty sure that she never got any inklings, maybe Richard Wright, anybody tried to tip her off about what all this was, the funding and such? Yeah,
I think one of the people I read for background who did a deep dive into her letters and her archive didn't see any evidence that she knew who that organization was, or she was sort of invited, I think, last minute, and I don't think she knew about them. And again, with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the fact that it had ties to the American state was kept secret, especially if you were not a member,
I see. That's the sort of thing when I see information like that, my question, we've asked lots of our guests this one. Okay, Joe, as a white man, who do you think is more informed about the global system of white supremacy racism, not what it feels like to be a victim? Just want to be explicit. That's not what we're talking about at all. Not what it feels like, but the daily mechanics of how things work, funding, all of that. Who has a better understanding of all of this? Is it people that are classified as white, or is it people who are not white, who better understand what racism is and how it works?
Well, if you're excluding what it feels like part, of course it's white people who participate.
I'm stunned.
I mean, my
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say my lens is through the reporting through the CIA and the version of this that's known as anti-communism. So that's what I was thinking when you asked me that.
Wow. just wow. Maybe we need to make sure we say it that way every time. That's so now I think we that is crazy. We've been asking that question for years, Joel. For listeners who are tuning in, Mr. Whitney did ask me to call him Joel. I normally, I don't do first name basis like that, but he did say, Joel is fine. So, Joel, we've been asking that question for years. 16 years we've been on the air. We've been asking that question for years. And we don't even have 5 people who have said, oh, yeah, I think white. And he didn't even take a whole lot of time on that one. That's every time. Make sure you say it in advance. This does not have anything to do with how it feels to be a victim, because that is not relevant at all. At all. And I had to ask right there because I've seen that so many times where, and you have it in the section on Minister Malcolm X, where you talk about the programs, the BOSS program, coordinating FBI with Central Intelligence Agency as well with New York State Police, and they're tapping his phone. And you said that they had got so good at tapping his phone, they know. We start the recording on the second ring because he picks up on the second ring, so we don't even get he doesn't even hear the click that we're listening. They said the same thing that you said about Lorraine Hansberry, that I don't think Malcolm X knows that we're listening to his phone calls. That's what I had to say. Now, who's more informed about racism, what it is, and how it works? Duh. Well,
now I see what you're saying. Well, Malcolm also did play this game that Peniel Joseph reports, and he would get to a talk, and he would look around the audience and say to himself, "Who do I think the informant is?" So I see where you're going, and I see. It's a great point. I thought that was telling, and they also, of course, knocked on his door and asked him to be an informant, and that's a telling conversation in the Malcolm X essay too.
I thought that I had heard that before, but I think that is important to hear again for a variety of reasons. That which enforcement officials were these? Were these CIA agents, FBI agents who came to say, hey, we'll give you some money if you want to give up some goods on, Elijah Muhammad, Nation of Islam. Hey, we got a lot. And he was really hurting. He had been cut off from the Nation of Islam, so that was his source of fund. And not that he was making millions, but I mean, he was hurting. He could have used a few coins. But which agency was this that approached him?
Let's just be accurate, like you say. I'm going to that page, Gus. Thank you for at the beginning of telling me to call you Gus as well. Otherwise, I would not have.
It's a 151, I think, because I highlighted it, so I'm going there too.
Okay, 151. All right. Yes. FBI, right.
Wow. And as I said, I think that's so important. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. My fault. Go ahead.
No, I interrupted you, but I think we were talking at the same time. The Bossy unit is kind of an NYPD attempt to create the equivalent of an FBI kind of undercover operation. So there were several people spying on him, the FBI and New York police in particular. But you're right. I mean, the Dr. Martin Luther King's family and Malcolm X's family, including his daughter, are suing not just those two mentioned agencies, but also the CIA over improper deaths, over the killings. So from that standpoint, yes, just pure knowledge of how this stuff works. Yeah, you see that. I mean, I was impressed by the degree to which Malcolm's savvy was clear and present throughout all of these talks that he did, and how I think he was curious, so he invited them in, and he was just a little bit astounded that they would offer him, and his response was apt as well.
and I mean, I am a huge fan of Minister Malcolm X. The audio that we started the program with today, I played that so many times, so important, just wow. But that said, I mean, even to your point about I think his kind of famous almost quip where he would introduce his lectures and such, and good evening, guests, friends, enemies, and you include in the book, people kind of snicker, and you kind of know, well, hey, some of these folks here. But even with that, he did not know. When we get to the end, and it's like half the people in the room are informants, and the person that were going to give him mouth to mouth, their informant, like he did not know. He did not know. He did not know. Even the best of us, that's what we end up saying every time. We did not know. Wow, white people were doing what? Who? What?
Right.
Oh my God, Jesus. And frequently it will be someone classified as white. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly was a guest on our program. We talked about his book, Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972, detail about COINTELPRO, Malcolm X, some of the same figures, preventing a black messiah. You include that in the text. That is also a white author who wrote that book and put all that soundtrack to Coup d'etat. I went to Los Angeles to see that film at the American Film Institute 2024 Film Festival. I sat in the same row with the filmmaker, Johan Grimonpré, Belgian white man, who put that film together about how white people around the world, and in the name, we started the program in the name of anti-communism, assassinated Patrice Lumumba. In the name of white supremacy, assassinated Patrice Lumumba. Oh, you talked about that in the book. I forgot, with Minister Malcolm X. I had that written down in my footnotes and everything. That's where I was going to ask you about soundtrack to Coup d'etat, but I already asked you about it. But yeah, Minister Malcolm talked about that huge. That's why I said he was very perceptive, but I don't even think he knew all of the details. In fact, I'll pause because you say that you talk about how Minister Malcolm X, he chided the Kennedy administration for the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Do you think that's true? Kennedy was just coming into the White House when Lumumba was assassinated.
That's right. I think the timing matters, and I could look up where I got that question. I asked it as a question because I wasn't sure, but certainly, I think it was January. I think it was before Kennedy was even. My understanding is that Kennedy would have. Well, I've heard two stories. I've heard that Kennedy would have been briefed, or should have been properly briefed, by the intelligence community if a coup was underway. But I also heard that he was shocked when it actually happened, and that therefore he may not have known. So in my secondary reading on that, separate from research directly done for this Malcolm essay, I kind of myself wasn't sure what Kennedy knew, and probably should do some more research.
Me too. And I've heard that as well, that Kennedy was shocked. In fact, I've heard that the CIA, white officials at the CIA deliberately did not tell him about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, and he found out way later. About a month after it had happened, he found out about it. I have heard that. I do also say, wow, this is the Kennedy family. These are not exactly poor Appalachian white people who are ignorant and toothless. Yes, Kennedy hadn't quite got to the White House yet, but don't you get staff free? Once you win the election, I think they start prepping you to get to the White House and such. Now, maybe they didn't tell him. Maybe he didn't know.
Yep.
But I mean, the Kennedy family? Really? And I come back, I'm at the same point. Any time where the excuse is we got ignorant white people, no way. I'm just, that is not what it's going to boil down to. We just got some old ignorant white, and no way. With Malcolm, you kind of pulled me to I'm sorry?
Sorry, just before you move on from that question about Lumumba and Kennedy, I think part of how they've convinced us that Kennedy didn't know, I think there's a famous photograph of Kennedy's face in his hands, and I think one of the captions of that says, "This is the moment when he found out about Lumumba." And so even if he did know, it would have dawned on him that he was campaigning to be this other kind of liberal president, in touch with the younger generations. He campaigned some of the time on being more, I don't know if he would use the word tolerant, but more open to the anti-colonial struggles. And here he is coming into office on the tail of this coup. And so they showed us this photo to try to, I think the photo does a lot to try to convince us that Kennedy didn't know about that plan. He should have been briefed. But sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
Quality info. I'll take that. It's perhaps, maybe not. Still ignorant white person. I don't know. And the other component, it's not just that. It's COINTELPRO. What I just mentioned. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly makes sure in both books, Nixon's Piano and Racial Matters, he makes sure to point out the Kennedy administration, they were co-signing what the FBI was doing in their COINTELPRO operations and eavesdropping and all the rest of it, putting lies in the newspaper to discredit Dr. King and you should commit suicide and Minister Malcolm X, George Plimpton and send this guy's an anti-Semite and all the rest of it. Look at him putting these peppermints in his Patrice Lumumba where they called him a devil. They co-signed on all that stuff. So, I mean, really, that's what I said. So, one, how ignorant are they? And then, is this the same thing we talked about before, so-called liberal, well-meaning white person who you have tricked me again and got me thinking you are not racist when you know exactly what they're doing with all this COINTELPRO operations, which is illegal, and that's double on the Kennedys. That's Robert Kennedy at the Justice Department and JFK in the White House. You know and co-sign on all this, which is illegal. Come on. Am I same thing? Am I being logical, evidence-based, Joel?
Absolutely. No, 100% logical. And there's even a moment that struck me as I think there's a white author who has a book called FBI's, EYES. It might be that one. By the way, there's a great author named Mary Helen Washington, a Black American author based in, I think, Maryland. She's got a book called The Other Blacklist, the African American literary and cultural left of the 1950s, and how many of them were being spied on. But when Baldwin becomes friends, I think through that meeting, or in the lead up to that meeting, I don't remember the exact date, but one of these authors, whose name, it's somewhere here on my shelves, traces a typical day in the life of Baldwin's surveillance. And the FBI is following him according to the Freedom of Information Act request on Baldwin's file. On a day where he's flying to join his brother for protests in the South, and he's during that surveillance, he calls Robert F. Kennedy, who would be the boss of that FBI agent spying on him, and obviously, as you said, would have had to sign off on the espionage, on the surveillance. So, yeah, I thought that was another one of those moments that's just, super circular and confusing.
Wow, I've been writing down books furiously as you've been chatting with us, Joel. Mary Helen Washington, the other blacklist, FBI's, EYES. You are informed about racism, white supremacy as a global system. That certainly is true, Joel Whitney, yes?
Well, I try to be. I feel like I'm a student, and my brain is getting full of footnotes, and I have to make new information all the time. I'm forgetting things all the time, and I'm a perpetual student, Gus, and I feel like there's so much that I don't know. The more I learn, the more I feel like I need to learn. So I try to stay informed, and in this particular case, on surveillance and spying and espionage and all the terrible things that American spies have done in various code words like anti-communism, white supremacy, I try to read and I try to present what I found, and I'm often shocked. But so I can't say I'm informed because I know how much I don't know.
Wow. Do you, based on what you have researched and what you know at this point, based on evidence, do you think FBI informants may have directly participated, as in like not orders and what have you, like directly participated in pulling the trigger in assassinating Minister Malcolm X, February 21, 1965?
I do think it's one of the main questions/allegations in the main film that I was writing about alongside Peniel Joseph's side-by-side biography. It was a Netflix series, docuseries called "Who Killed Malcolm X," and of all places, that was the first time I learned about an alleged killer who had been protected from Newark Mosque number 25, who was supposed to be the trigger man. He went on to commit a lot of crimes of the type that someone would commit if they felt they had the kind of impunity that informants have, or so the film led me to believe. And they did have some files to back that up. Some of the files from the FBI let the New York police rather, continue to pursue wrong suspects and put innocent black men in prison. 2 of the 3 that were arrested maintained their innocence and were probably that was corroborated by these memos that said if anybody else is targeted for arrest for this, they have to inform us at the FBI. So it did look like this guy who went by, I think, William X, I think he may have been protected informant. And so, yeah.
Wow. Context of White Supremacy. Carl Evans' book is amazing. It has a lot about both the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and the assassination of Minister Malcolm X, that both of these being white supremacist plots. And Carl Evans is in that Netflix documentary. I don't know if they put his book up, but he certainly was included. You talked about they include researchers and historians. His book is amazing, one of the best that I've read, The Judas Factor. Before we let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, one, just because Leonard Peltier, he just got his sentence commuted. They didn't give him full pardon, which, and I guess President Trump could have vetoed all that, so maybe, it's for the best. But can you detail it caught my attention in such a startling manner. We've been talking about the Goon Squad in so many different ways. I'd researched Wounded Knee before. I certainly am very familiar with Leonard Peltier. COINTELPRO, how could I not be familiar with Leonard Peltier? But I had forgotten the Goon Squad. I guess one is Richard Dickey Wilson. Is that a white man?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, actually, sorry. He's a tribal member. He was a tribal leader.
Is he classified as white? Because, sometimes they get these, people that are native, so-called, Elizabeth Warren. So is Dickey Wilson, is this a white person, or is he a for real non-white person?
I think my Native American friends call those that you're talking about, like Elizabeth Warren, pretendian. And I've never heard Dickey described as a pretendian. I think he was, actually of indigenous blood.
Okay, I have to see some pictures of him. But Dickey Wilson, he's the tribal chair, and he has a private militia with the Guardians of Oglala Nations, the Goons, and they're backed by the U.S. government to do what exactly, Joel?
Well, that is the question. They seem to be stuffing the ballot boxes so they could maintain power, and I think they were the government-friendly ones. They were part of this COINTEL pushback against these radical activists and Indian activism, and what has come to be called land back campaigns and Native rights. So when they sort of started working together and how that happened, the American Indian Movement, which is what it's called itself, starting in around 1967, they started working on over arrest of indigenous community members in places like Minnesota. But it worked quickly to look at other kinds of problems, like, white supremacy in textbooks and things like that. So by the time this fake election happens, that reelects Wilson, they've done the Trail of Broken Treaties, the activists, the movement, and they've marched to the Department of the Interior, where all the treaties that were violated by American white supremacists, and and all the leaders that signed sovereign-to-sovereign nation treaties that should have been and can only be terminated through an act of Congress and never were. So that includes so many, 574 federally recognized tribes now. And so in the mid-century, many of them were terminated for the government to save money. The government pretended they were naturally socialist environments. So they were marching, and there was a movement, an outcrop of the new left, and they marched, and they didn't really ransack the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which was the main organization that did all this to them. But they did confiscate some of those treaties before they left. And so all this happens as this kind of movement is underway. And I think the COINTELPRO powers were looking for, reliable allies, as they might have put it in the international context when they propped up dictators and things like that. So this was a guy who was known to cheat on his elections, he had the backing of the feds, and it was an operation to sort of make sure that the other side was not successful.
That was such a widespread pattern during this time period in terms of people classified as white, training, arming non-white people to go and commit violence against other groups of non-white people throughout the world, Vietnam, Congo, just all over the continent of Africa. Just wow. Wow, that is... Do you think Leonard Peltier, do you think he should have got a full pardon instead of just getting his sentence commuted by President Biden as he was leaving office?
I do. I think he should have.
Maybe they were thinking if that had happened, Trump would have maybe revoked it, which I guess he did do in some cases. But either way, out. I guess before we let you depart, make sure I didn't miss any questions from our listeners. Folk had something they wanted to get in really quick from Joel before we depart. I feel like we've talked about so many different amazing. I have so many books I have to go in and check. My question before I miss, Jean Genet, you said you do plays and such. Are you familiar with his play, The Blacks, a Clown Show? Is that one, have you, I don't know, analyzed or seen?
I have never seen it, but it comes up, I think you said the same thing, it comes up in pairs sometimes, and I was curious about it because I think Lorraine Hansberry's play The Blacks was sort of tipping its hat to that play. I'm not sure. I'll double check that, but I think she was sort of doing a follow-up play after his had come out.
I bet that's true. I haven't seen that, so folks don't, but I think that's true because that's the same time period, and I'm sure she would have seen it and bunches of times probably. Dr. Maya Angelou was in it, so I'm sure that's probably what it is. Did you know Jean Genet, he came over here in the Black Panthers, I guess for whatever, they thought he was a really cool, not racist white dude, and they provided security for him when he came to the States to visit?
I heard about that. I think my aunt Kathleen told me about that relationship and that play, but whatever she said, I didn't read it for myself, and I was just always curious about it. And it's on the list. We both have apparently long reading lists of things to read.
For more reading, his aunt is not, your aunt, I'm assuming, is classified as white?
Yes.
Of course. Again, white people not ignorant about racism. I have learned a bunch. Just wow. We've been chatting it up. Joel Whitney, his 2 books. We spent most of the time on Flights, which I'll give the full title, Flights, Radicals on the Run. But we did early snippet of that I thought was important. George Plimpton, they've been talking about him in the Rumble in the Jungle and all that. Finks, how the CIA tricked the world's best writers. The section on Richard Wright. Wow, that alone worth a read. It looks like folks are sat there. Maybe they're writing down books to read that they've heard us chatting about. I have learned a ton. Thank you for sharing the book and fielding our questions for the evening, Mr. Whitney. Hopefully you'll keep up the writing. We will be on the lookout. Maybe you can see about having Dr. Wiegand come up to Brooklyn, because I think he does talk about New York City being involved in all of this, to talk about his book, In Silence or Indifference. I would even have to think, like, wow, if he's going to come there and do a talk, whew, we need to get to New York City. But maybe you can think about having him to come and chat about the history of white supremacy in U.S. public libraries. That's, I think, an important one.
I've written that down. That was, I think, the first one I wrote down after you told me about that. It's super relevant, super interesting. And I have to thank you for your interest and for your time. I mean, spending 2 hours on these two books, this is the longest radio/podcast interview I've done on any of my books. And the time flew, and I learned so much from you, and I obviously have so much more to learn. And I'm just really thankful.
Much obliged. Hopefully we haven't been wasting your time, listeners' time. I wrote down quite a few books as well, so lots to learn. Again, author, writer, librarian, I think, accurate title, has that big, curated that big section. They go to all 60-plus libraries in the Brooklyn area. I guess you can be on the lookout. We have listeners in New York City. Be on the lookout when they have series and such. If something sounds interesting, go. You might find a book that you want to read. Much obliged, Joel Whitney. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, sir.
Thank you so much, Gus.
For sure. Context of White Supremacy. See the F's, Finks, and then flights. And they are super related. Lots of same subject matter. And the CIA. Again, our guest, Mr. Joel Whitney. Man. And he'd seen soundtrack to Coup d'etat. Did you see? He saw soundtrack and he said it was great, which, I mean, it did get nominated for an Academy Award. So, yeah. Lots of people apparently thought it was great, and it was. And I can get my slow, or I guess medium, brag that I did not just see that film. I saw the film at the film festivals. I even have my double brag because I saw it at 2 different film festivals. The American Film Institute Festival in Los Angeles had to endure the bad air, tried to poison me, and at the Seattle International Film Festival. Double. Wow. Told you all in advance, year early. Any hoodles. We will take a quick, matter of fact, we'll get in Leonard Peltier, one of the major figures at Goon Squad. Different one operating up in Wounded Knee. That is like atrocious on so many levels. Like I said, I've read Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, Racial Matters, but also Agents of Repression. That's it. Ward Churchill, Jim Vanderwall, the FBI's war against the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement, shortened to AIM, AIM. But they include massive chapters. It's not just like one tiny, paragraph. It's like it's like half the book. I think it's kind of split. Half of it is, the first half is the Black Panther Party, because they came first chronologically, and then AIM, and they acknowledge and have lots of gratitude for the Black Panther Party's work and influencing what they did, and all that good stuff. But that's the second half of the book, is AIM, and they talk about Wounded Knee and all that. Some of this is probably just forgot. Go back, look at the details. That's why it's good to reread things, and to be reminded of the Minister Malcolm X being offered money, snitch on the Nation of Islam, will give you some money and all that. It's good to be reminded of that sort of thing. But the Goon Squad, we will give you all guns to go and terrorize other non-white people. Like, what? What? Come on. Like, gee whiz. Learn a little bit about everything. Wow. But Leonard Peltier, he just was given that, I was going to say pardon. They did not pardon Leonard Peltier. Biden on his way out. He commuted his sentence. I mean, at this point, Leonard Peltier is quite old. I mean, really, what is he, he's going to go out in the streets and stomp around 80 years? Come on. I guess he should be thankful, because he could have rotted in prison till he died. So I guess, whatever. Leonard Peltier just released, and I guess maybe even pay attention, because President Trump has been rescinding some of these like commutations and pardons and such. So, Leonard Peltier, one of the subjects of Flight's Victim, and I guess Victim of White Supremacy, Racism, victim of the Wounded Knee Goon Squad.
A homecoming nearly 50 years in the making. Native American activist Leonard Peltier returned home tonight to North Dakota after spending a majority of his life in prison. President Joe Biden commuted his life sentence hours before Biden left office. Heidi picks it up from here.
Yeah, Jana, Leonard took a private plane from Florida to Devils Lake Regional Airport in North Dakota. From there, he returned home to Belcourt, where friends and family welcomed him at the Skydancer Casino for a special dinner. It's Leonard's first time home in nearly half a century.
On Tuesday morning, Leonard Peltier left a Florida prison and boarded a plane home to North Dakota with supporters waving him goodbye. These are some of the first photos since Leonard's release from the American Indian movement. And here he is talking after his release.
We're going to continue until we are a free nation. I gave 50 years for that, you know, and I'm going to give the rest of my life.
The 80-year-old, a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in North Dakota, spent nearly 50 years imprisoned. During his last hours in office, President Joe Biden commuted Peltier's life sentence, allowing him to spend his remaining days in home confinement.
I'm feeling just, overwhelmed. I'm thankful and happy that he's finally been released.
Chauncey Peltier was just 10 years old when his father went to prison.
If I wanted to see him, I would have to go to the prison to visit him. So just to see him a free man is just going to be overwhelming with joy.
Leonard was convicted in the 1975 killings of FBI agents Jack Kohler and Ronald Williams at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Peltier claims he fired his gun from a distance, but said it was in self-defense and that his shots were not the ones that killed the agents. Prosecutors said he shot the agents at point-blank range. What followed has been decades of lobbying and protests by those who believe he was wrongfully convicted, calling him a political prisoner. But his commutation received pushback from then FBI Director Christopher Wray, who urged Biden against it.
It's a miscarriage of justice.
Retired FBI agent Nicholas O'Hara was in charge of the FBI for Minnesota and the Dakotas in the early 90s and at D.C. headquarters at the time of the murders.
No acknowledgement of his violent behavior, no acknowledgement of the killings, no reason to ever commute his sentence. But it's done. It's a done deal.
While O'Hara is urging people to research the case, Chauncey is saying the same, both believing the facts support their side.
To the people that don't believe he should be released, I'd ask them to educate themselves on Leonard's case and not just hear the FBI side of the story.
Peltier was denied parole as recently as July.
I just wanted to thank President Biden for finally releasing my father and doing the right thing. Even some of my hardcore Republican friends are saying they're thankful that Joe did this.
And Jana, tomorrow, NDN Collective is hosting a celebration at the Skydancer Event Center in Belcourt at noon to welcome Leonard home. Also, his son Chauncey lives in Oregon, and he's planning to visit him, he said, probably around sometime in March.
1960s, after the death of Martin Luther King and the riots and the upheavals and all like this, and black people with their fists in the air and all like that, and trying to stumble and fumble and find their way and get focus, the white supremacists made a blueprint and put it in action, and that is, I'm going to have these people so confused, they don't even know what they started out to do. And by the late 1970s, they had just about completed it. And we've been on that ever since. And you mentioned something very important. They are more comfortable than ever. But see, it's like making gorillas comfortable in a cage, or monkeys, or pandas. You still got them in a cage, but they're comfortable. See, so give him some bling bling. It's like giving an animal a brand new car and training the animal to ride up and down the street in it. And then you stand back and point at the animal. Like one white man said in the late 1950s, he said he doesn't care what kind of car a Negro has. He said he's still a nigger. And when he rides by in a shiny car, to him, it's just a monkey in a car. White people built a car, put a monkey in it, trained the monkey to drive the car, so now you're looking at a monkey in a car. See, but black people don't see themselves that way.
But this is how the white supremacists see us, and they are the ones who run our business. And we have to know that when they look at us, that's what they see. That's what they see. That's what they see. And at a subliminal level, what they see begins to spill over into our brains so that we, at a subliminal level, see each other that way. And indirectly see ourselves that way.
The cows. We should be here on Wednesday? Double check. I think Wednesday. Oh, Tuesday, see. April 1. Have to confirm. Looking forward. Looking forward. Tuesday, April 1. I'll let folks know via social media. Follow @UntilJustice. @UntilJustice. That's it. Much obliged, folks, tuning in live archive. Hopefully worthy of your time and energy, attempting to be serious, attempted counter-racist students, scholars, using our brain computer, even getting an opportunity to ask a white person some questions, or a few questions, many questions, as many as possible. Any hoodles. The book club, since we've been talking about JFK, book club, Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. Third installment, Abraham Bolden, The Echo from Dealey Plaza. Wow, just hearing a black male, Secret Service, talking about enforcement agencies and the way that he was treated, and then, his thoughts, premonitions, if you want to call it that, or just one, seeing the lack of codification and professionalism about people that were supposed to be protecting the life of President Kennedy. And then, oh man, the racism, oh man, something bad is going to happen, and it did. More to come, Mr. Bolden, and all of the workplace racism involved with him being the first black secret agent. No, that couldn't have been fun during the 1960s. Nigger jokes and all the rest of it. Wow, what a hoot, Abraham Bolden. Wish I'd read this book earlier, but time is right and exact. I'll give a few tidbits, just points that I think were important from our dialogue. Read, I can't say it enough, read Carl Evans' book, The Judas Factor. I think that text is so important. A black male author. I think I read that book before the cows even existed. There's so many texts on the lifetime's assassination of Minister Malcolm X, and that book specifically, Carl Evans is in that Netflix documentary about the COINTELPRO effort to assassinate Minister Malcolm X, and then the cover-up all these years and having two black males wrongly incarcerated. We brought that up because Dr. Maya Angelou, she was just talking about the assassination of Malcolm X in her memoir, her sixth memoir, A Song Flung Up to Heaven, and she was doing that old, oh man, he died, you live by the sword and you die by the sword, and and us black, what's wrong with us black people and black people killing other black people? I said, man, COINTELPRO, same thing I just said. Now, who is more informed about racism, white supremacy? Dr. Angelou, and she wrote this book in 2002. She didn't say nothing about COINTELPRO and the boss agents, and she didn't say nothing about that. She said black on black crime. That's what she said. And that's what most people say when they talk about Minister Malcolm X. Perfection. COINTELPRO. Exact. We don't get blamed. They blame each other, which was a big part of the COINTELPRO program. He wrote that specifically in the book. Joel Whitney, like, yep, get them to fight with each other, and then, hey, if we can get them to blame each other or even put the guns in their hand, hey, goon squad. Anyway, the Judas Factor, but that book also includes Patrice Lumumba, and we talked about when we were reading Andre Bloom's book and talking about Soundtrack to Coup d'etat, and what a great film. Minister Malcolm X talked about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. In fact, I emphasized he spent a lot of time. 7 days before his assassination, February 14, 1965, he is about to be assassinated. He says, I got to stop and spend my last few moments on earth. I got to talk about what white people did to Patrice Lumumba. That's how important he thought that was. You want an example of global system of white supremacy racism? The assassination of Patrice Lumumba. And that's what I think makes Soundtrack to Coup d'etat so good. That's one of the main points. This was white people around the world. We are going to get rid of that nigger and call him a nigger. Said sometimes you get the impression like, dang, it seems like white people don't really disaggregate niggers. It's just niggers is niggers. Patrice Lumumba, Minister Malcolm X, Steve Biko, niggers is niggers. I could be wrong, but I mean, dang. Anyway, Carl Evans, you should read that one. I'm going to have to get FBI's EYES because I haven't read that one. I had never even heard of that one. Or Mary Helen Washington, The Other Black List. Have to get that one too. And Dr. Welsing, go back to get the oldies too. If you have not read Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, Racial Matters, the FBI secret file on Black America, as I gaze on my bookshelf, there it is. You have to get the Dr. Welsing. She starts the ISIS papers saying if you've not read that book, you do not qualify to speak about racism. Bill Cosby said you got to read that book. Whew. Racial matter. And make COINTELPRO. That's one of the subjects. We just study this. Any books come out about COINTELPRO? Fred Hampton, Dr. King, Malcolm X, Betty Shabazz, Angela Davis. It would just go on and on and on. COINTELPRO. Yes, that's what I said. The Glass House tapes. That's the L.A. version of the program that they had in New York, where they had the New York police with Minister Malcolm X and Gene Roberts and all of that. Glass House tapes. That gives you the L.A. version, Black Panther Party, and all of that. Even Jonestown being a CIA medical experiment. I started the program. I said, James Reston, he worked for the CIA? Oh, man, if you're on Jonestown, do you know the name James Reston? Was Jonestown a CIA medical experiment? And then James Reston, one of the lead authors, journalists on Jonestown, and then he wrote the book, Our Father Who Art in Hell, The Life and Death of Jim Jones. James Reston. How interesting. Anyway, other authors that were mentioned, Ibram X. Kendi. We've heard him mentioned on the program before. This is one I'm relying on my memory, so our caller at the courthouse in Florida, I'll verify to make sure I'm not lying on him. I want to make sure. I guess if he hears this live, you can hand up and you check Gus T. Hard. Don't be lying on me, black brother. You get it right. Darn tootin'. Strive for accuracy. I believe our caller in Florida at the courthouse specifically had said that Victim of White Supremacy, for those who do not know, Ibram X. Kendi is a black male, victim of white supremacy, and he for sure has victims guaranteed qualified. I'm going to give it to him even if he's not read Racial Matters. VGQ still. But I think our caller at the courthouse in Florida said that Mr. Kendi was going to be in the region to do some sort of talk on racism allowed by white people, and I think he said he was going to attend, and he said he heard it, VGQ, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of constructive, accurate information that could be used to replace white supremacy with justice immediately. That's what I heard today, and that's what I hear every time I hear a white person mention Ibram X. Kendi. Every time. I've never heard his name be mentioned by someone classified as white connected to anything constructive. Anti-racist? Oh my gosh. We do not need anyone labeled anti-racist. I don't even call myself an anti-racist. All we need is, where are the racists? That's the same thing I said to Joel when he was with us, talking about feeling bad and all the. Where are the racists? How is it that we get? These are the ways that I, as a white person, am also a victim of racism. These are the ways that I am as a white person, am also retarded by racism, and we get two things on the list before it's. How do you practice racism? How are you so certain about ways that you are a victim of racism and held back by racism, but you have no certainty about it? Should be, let me just get to today how I practiced racism. We never get that. It's, That's what we get. Or they'll tell us, these are the ways that I have white privilege. All of the same thing I said earlier. Deliberate deception and white supremacy racism. Even to start, we're on the plantation. Plantation owner, I'm going to put my mint whip down for a moment. Get my penis out of that 12-year-old child, Sally Hemings. Say, Leroy, Kunta, this plantation thing holds me back too. Really? You said you sold my child and got out of debt. How are you held back? Well, look here, Leroy. I'd have a little bit more humanity, I think, if I wasn't selling off your child and raping your daughter, raping you. And I'd have some black friends, because it's a little different when I sell you all whenever I feel like it. We're not really friends. Might be a better person, have a better experience if I had me a Negro friend or two. What? What? And on a planet where white people around the world have said, I'm not interested in having no Negro friends. I'm not even saying anything radical or revolutionary. This was on Melissa Harris Perry. She has a white parent. They said, man, we went around and asked white people where they want to live, and it was clean. No Negroes. And she asked it that plain. She said, it sounds like you saying that white people don't want to live around black people, even if it's no crime and it's great amenities, great schools, great parks. The main thing is no Negroes. And the guest said, yep, no Negroes. They said black people, but I mean, no Negroes. We don't want no Negro friends. In fact, we said our humanity, really, the religion of white supremacy. We're supposed to dominate you Negroes. We don't feel bad about it. We sit around, we joke about it. Lakers call Kobe Bryant a Negro. Bron James a Negro. Magic Johnson a Negro. Reem Abdul-Jabbar a Negro. Wilt Chamberlain a Negro. James Worthy a Negro. Ron Artest, he a Negro. Even Kobe Bryant in death, Negro. Anyhoodles, Ibram X Kendi, VGQ. But man, you all can let me. We might even have to read one of his books in the book club just so that I can point and be like, do you see? I have to think about that, but I mean, never. I do not ever, and I've said that James Baldwin, most of the time it's a non-white person who is deceased. That's when it's like, oh man, when my man said you can drop flag, it's going to be danger, massive deception, confusion, white supremacy, racism, when it's like James Baldwin, non-white person who is deceased. France Fanon, that's another popular one. Oh man. All kinds of things that are inaccurate, are not logical about the system of white supremacy racism. Ibram X Kendi is still alive, but that's another one on my list. Like, his name gets mentioned. Watch it. Duck, incoming, danger. master deceivers, and they're going to be using a victim of white supremacy. I might even say that's a different form of linguistic racial showcasing, because they can say something wrong, deceptive, racist, and they say, well, hey, that's Ibram X. Kendi wrote this. Man, he's a great Negro scholar, one of the best you got. VGQ. That's for Mr. Kendi, not you, white dude, white fella, white woman. Same thing I say if they quote James Baldwin, which they do, and it'll be something real incorrect when they quote James Baldwin. People that were duped by the CIA type thing. Let's see. The God That Failed, Neely Fuller Jr. recommended that book written by Richard Wright, Victim of White Supremacy, and that's exactly what he was talking about. Where where he was saying Richard Wright comes from the South, Mississippi, if my memory is correct. He comes to Chicago. Shout to Pam, Dr. Welsing. He goes to Chicago, and communism, that comes up so many times. I'm going to be a Marxist-Leninist. I'm going to be a communist. I'm going to be a socialist. Go off with Jim Jones. And he's, I'll be a communist. He said, wait a minute. These white communists, they're over here and talking about black people aren't concerned and aren't doing the right thing. Wait a minute. These black people don't even know nothing about this. And they're victims of racism. And wait a minute. And y'all are still practicing racism against me. Like, wait a minute. And he got, that's exactly why Mr. Fuller recommended that book. And it's non-fiction. Richard Wright, a lot of times people will talk about his novels, as mentioned, Native Son, Black Boy, I guess Cowbell for Native Son, which Joel Whitney mentioned with us today. But he also mentioned The God That Failed, and those are non-fiction essays that were written by Richard Wright. Like I said, Mr. Fuller, apparently, he read those essays. He was a fan. He said that Richard Wright, he is a smart dude. He had quite a bit of great, what Mr. Fuller thought were accurate insights about the system of white supremacy, and how sometimes we get fooled by these folks saying they're well-meaning white people, socialist, Marxist-Leninist, communist, Jim Jones, or whatever else, the anti-racist, whatever, label they come a-calling with. Any hoodles. All of that said, oh my God, did you hear? I'm going to have to go back and sound clip that. Like, I don't think we have ever, and I mean ever, heard it that clean on the broadcast. I'm going to have to go back and tag some of the specifics. Dr. Lorna Durant, black female. She was on the program the beginning of 2023. She said, white people more informed about racism. We had Dr. Martin Kevorkian. I mean, wow, how many times he's been a guest on the program, admitted white supremacist. And he eloquently took his time to detail white people are more informed about white supremacy racism. We had a different non-white female. I have to go back and get her name. It should be etched in my mind because I think she was only number 2 on the list at the time in terms of guests who have said, oh yeah, white people are. And I mean, it didn't take a teasing out or anything. We'd have to go back and forth. Oh yeah, white people are more informed. And now today, I think we might have one more, but I think it's like 5 people ever in the long history of us asking that question. I mean, it was quick. Oh, and is that all you have to do is make sure you preface, hey, look here, white man, don't you be talking about how it feels, and I ain't never had my back lashed in the sun because I didn't get enough corn. I don't know what it feels like to have a white man stick a plunger in your rectum. I don't know what it's like to be Abner Louima. I don't know about the O.J. Simpson experience when the whole world say you killed a white woman. He said, I didn't kill no. And you ain't got no, who saw I didn't kill it? You killed a white woman. I don't know what the O.J. Simpson experience. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the mechanics of. Now, who knows that the CIA put the budget for this group together to confuse the niggers? Oh, okay. Oh, if that's what you mean and not how it feels to get the O.J. Simpson treatment, oh, well, yes, it would be white people. Man, that's why I have to have my mute button because, wow. I'm so glad I didn't have my T on that one. I would have messed up some electronic devices. Like, what? Did you? That's the way to ask every time. You make sure you tell them, and I mean get firm about, hey, don't you come out about that. I don't do that. What it is and how it works. Every time. That's the way you add. What it is and how it works. Not how does it feel to be a Negro. Any hoodles. Let's see. Folks who dialed in with us. Let's see. Octavius in New York. Did you have commentary to share? You can go to the Brooklyn Public Library, man. If he gets Dr. Wiegand, go and cut a fool. Hopefully they'll have hors d'oeuvres so you can eat all their veggie snacks, and then you can ask 3-4 questions about racism at the Brooklyn Public Library. Octavius in New York.
Yeah, greetings, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate the commentary. I do think I feel like I'm building my library, and every time I think I have enough and I should just start reading, I realize that I still have more things to pick up, and that just it's just amazing to me. But I haven't gone to any of his events, although there are plenty of events, and there is a section. There is a major Brooklyn Public Library that I kind of frequent, and that's the one I went to and saw the James Baldwin exhibit, which was again not well done, and I just thought it was just pretty poor to me in my eyes. They didn't even have commentary as to why he went to Turkey. They didn't explain that he was suicidal because they killed Medgar Evers and they killed Martin Luther King. And that's part of the reason why he went out there, to escape, because he was so depressed. But that being said, there is another library in Brooklyn Public Library that's the historic one, where you would go to like really pull archives about the borough itself, and of course other boroughs, but mainly Brooklyn Public Library, Brooklyn. And that's the one that I try to go to frequent for events. But there are events all over the city that it's not easy to keep up. I got to be honest with you. So it's good to hear that this is somebody I could kind of tail and maybe follow some of their work to see if they have things that are constructive. And Kenneth O'Reilly's Racial Matters, I do have that book, but I have not read it. Actually, now I realize how important that book is, because I do recall you mentioning prior, yes, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said you should read this book first before diving into the topic of racism and speaking on it in a large scale. So I do think I have to do some more work. Again, including the author you had on that had the book about librarians and racism. That's just a lot of information, a lot of things to pick up. Again, thank you for your time and energy. Appreciate the show, and I'll mute my line.
Dive into metaphor. I'm reading the dedication to the ISIS papers, so you don't even have to read the full book. In fact, this is before the table of contents. I like to point it out that way. So even if you just picked up somebody else's copy, before the table of contents, dedication. This work is dedicated to the victims of the global system of white supremacy, racism, all non-white people worldwide, past and present, who have resolved to end this great travesty and bring justice, then peace to planet Earth. It's not dedicated to black people and the most melanated and my black brothers with 8 great-grandparents in Georgia. That's not what it says. If you do not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you do understand will only confuse you. Neely Fuller Jr. No persons who classify themselves as white living in the area of the world referred to as the United States of America, or for that matter in any other part of the world, should presume to tell any black person or other non-white person what racism is or is not until they have completely read Kenneth O'Reilly's Racial Matters, the FBI's Secret File on Black America, 1960 to 1972. No black person living in the area of the world referred to as the United States of America should discourse on racism or deny the conspiratorial dimensions of the local and global system of racism until she has read Racial Matters completely. That's before you get to the table of contents of the ISIS papers. That's how important Dr. Welsing thought this book was. In fact, I even pointed out, now she has mentioned Mr. Fuller already. She recommends this book before the Code book. Just noting an observation. I've heard that frequently people are aware, much like the ISIS papers, Urugu, most of the books that I say are important, where people say, yes, I'm aware of that book, I have that book, I've not read that book. Not pattern. And that's such an important, it's not like that's a lame book, like as I gaze at that book now, like it's not like that's a lame book. Hey, that's one of the only books where we had the author on more than once to talk about the same book. Like that is a no-no, because I don't like doing repetition, but we did repeat Racial Matters, America's, or the FBI Secret File on Black America, 1960, 1972. System, that's one of the most important words. System. This was not one bad apple. This was a system designed to neutralize black people. In fact, the first time he was a guest on the Cows, which is April 2009, he said, before there even was an FBI, white people kept tabs on black people. Why? Black people are treated like garbage. White people know this, so black people's loyalties are suspect. We got to keep tabs on the niggers. He told barbershop, we got to keep tabs on the niggers. What are y'all up to? What you do? That's another thing you should think about. All that. I love black people and black culture. Like, whatever. All that, and all that's in Racial Matters. It's not like he just said this out of the blue. All of that is in Racial Matters, written by a white man. In fact, I think all the books that I have read on COINTELPRO at this point in my life, and that one, Agents of Repression, that's written by white people, I've not read one written by a black person. Now, I guess he might have told us one. I'm going to have to get this. What he said, written by a black female, Mary Helen Washington, The Other Black List. And it sounds like that might be one, but all of the books that I'm aware of that have been written about COINTELPRO, I guess with the exception of the Glass House tapes, that's written by a black person, but all of them are written by white people. Not that I'm, surprised about that or what have you, but I'm just pointing out, add that to who's more informed about white supremacy racism. Retired firefighter in Florida. Did you have commentary to share? Should be with us as well. Clicked wrong. There we go. Retired firefighter in Florida. Might be muted. If you muted yourself, maybe. I don't think I messed it up.
Yeah, I did have myself on mute. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I was just thinking with today's session that when you give your meaning for the word for racism, white supremacy, I'm beginning to count that most people, white and non-white, agree with it. most of your guests agree with it. But I'm going to specifically stay with the white people, that they actually agree with it. But it sounds contradicting when you ask on who is the most informed about racism. And most of the white people basically start stuttering and not really answering correctly, and it leans more towards that the people who are most informed about racism are people who are not white, and that seems, between those two questions to the person that you're asking, it sounds like they're being quite contradicting themselves with that. That's what I pick up on. Maybe others don't, but that's what I kind of like pick up on when I listen to the programs. But I would also like to say the book, this recent book that we are reading, is pretty interesting to me. It's pretty interesting to me, and basically learning about the workplace and a victim of racism and the mistakes that that non-white person is making. That is still is something, although it took place decades ago, it still is something that could be learned from. About the mistakes that he has been making, and it's probably going to be a lot more during the course of the book. And also just by the subject matter being John Fitzgerald Kennedy, to me is quite interesting because, as I mentioned before, about him personally as being very tactful as a white person. As a white person, very tactful. He was a part of, Mr. Fuller mentions about the 4 stages of racism, white supremacy, establishment, and the last one is revisement. And he is one of the chief characters of the revisement part of racism, white supremacy. As I mentioned, very smart, coached by his father, and the only person that I knew of that was recorded of being very critical of him at that time was Minister Malcolm X. And there's plenty of tape on it. You played one of them early in the beginning of the program. And that's why I think the book is quite interesting, and I'm always looking forward to joining in on the book reading. Thanks for listening.
Catherine Massey Book Club, Fridays, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. This Friday, installment number 3, Abraham Bolden's The Echo from Dealey Plaza. Much obliged, retired firefighter in Florida. I too think, Jed, that's why the point that I raised with our guest, Mr. Joel Whitney, we were talking about whether or not JFK and Minister Malcolm X's critique of John Kennedy for the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, what I was saying is that a valid criticism. And that's one of those where, time is so important, even going by the day, because John Kennedy comes to the White House in January of 1961. That is when Patrice Lumumba is killed. Now, records indicate white people, John Kennedy allegedly did not find out about this assassination until February, as was the case with other individuals. Now, that's what I'm saying now. Do I think that's true? Powerful white man? You're going to be president, most powerful white man in the world. It's not like he was a toothless nobody, high school dropout before he was president. The Kennedy family? You didn't know about this. After you won the election in November, you didn't get no security briefings and all that. Like I said, now that's alleged. Maybe the CIA, maybe white people didn't tell him. We didn't kill that Negro Lumumba. Really? And then, like I said, when you come on the other side, now again, Racial Matters and Nixon's Piano, because he wrote 2 books talking about how President Kennedy practiced white supremacy racism. And a part of it is he and his brother, Robert Kennedy, Justice Department Attorney General, go right ahead. J. Edgar Hoover, FBI agents, go out there and COINTELPRO it up, whatever you need to do to neutralize these no-count Negras. You know, and Joel Whitney wrote about that when Lorraine Hansberry, Harry Belafonte, they go to the White House, large contingent of black people. I think James Baldwin is there as well. Hey, man, you need to, do justice. Y'all at the White House, y'all can send in federal troops and all this. Y'all can go bomb slopes and slant-eyes in Vietnam. Certainly you can send in some white people that make these folks do justice and stop killing black people in the South. Oh, my gosh, you impatient, uppity niggers. Come on. That's why I said I'm not on all that. JFK was, I think, retired firefighter was correct in saying basically the only black person who criticized Kennedy at this point was Minister Malcolm X, and he got kicked out of the Nation of Islam allegedly for that. So I mean, dang, you get in trouble for talking about a good white person. Like, oh man, what did he? And all of his criticisms were correct. Taking over, that's the one that I play him, co-opting the March on Washington, super valid, insightful criticism, all that. He didn't even know about the COINTELPRO component of all this. Him pointing, he didn't send in troops to Birmingham until black people started fighting back. Like, whoa, you don't pick up a gun, Leroy. Wait a minute now. You could have done that from, well, if we got to all this point, which is what Lorraine Hansberry and company were saying. Anyway, that's what I'm not on all that. Not all white people is racist. Come on. Or white people are ignorant. I'm not picking up neither one of those like that because that's so frequent that not all white people is racist. And in those who are racist, they're just ignorant. That is the stupidest thing in the world. Come on. Anywho, just striving for accuracy, the stages of white supremacy: establishment, maintenance, expansion, refinement. I think it might have been said revisement. It is refinement, unless I'm in error, but I think it is refinement for that 4th stage where we seem to be now, where we can have anti-racists, well-meaning white people, and not all white people is racist. Anywho, we will be here. Oh, and I even have to revise. So I got my mittens on the other blacklist, the African American literary and cultural left of the 1950s. This is not a COINTELPRO book. So now, I'm not saying it's not constructive because it is similar. This is during the so-called McCarthy era, probably Paul Robeson, individuals like that, how they were at Ralph Ellison, if I had to think who would be in here, Richard Wright for that time period, probably Lorraine Hansberry. That's a little bit before Raisin in the Sun, but I would suspect she'd probably be in there too. But this is not a COINTELPRO book. So, again, not saying not to read it. Black scholar, probably got lots of great information about how white people practiced white supremacy against black people. Anywho, we will be back on perhaps Wednesday, or excuse Tuesday. Got to get it correct. Wednesday, I will confirm and let you all know. And then for Thursday, Neutralizing Workplace Racism, and Friday with Abraham Bolden, Catherine Massey Book Club. But hopefully constructive and got folks a nice chunky reading list. In my opinion, Carl Evans' book, Judas Factor, that should be on the list. That is such a great book. It has such great information in it. It's so well researched. Patrice Lumumba is in that book, as well as Minister, obviously the key central figure is Minister Malcolm X. and how that might count as a COINTELPRO book. Yeah, I think that might count as one COINTELPRO book. The great Carl Evans, who was in that Netflix documentary on the assassination of Malcolm X. As I said, most of the documentaries that I'm aware of, including Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, if they are good, they generally include a lot of great books. Sometimes they'll get the authors of those great books to come and, share some of their detail, help do some of the narration, so that we can get great context for what, whatever they're going to be telling us. Why Patrice Lumumba was killed. How white people lied about the assassination of Malcolm X. That sort of thing. But yeah, Judas Factor is phenomenal. I would encourage folks to check it out. I'm going to have to see if this is written by a black person, because that other book that he mentioned, FBI's How J. Edgar Hoover's Ghost Readers Framed African American Literature. Now, I suspect that this is going to be a COINTELPRO, but and it's a white person. No. See, that so embarrassing. That's the way that I like to frame that question, when it's just the evidence is right there in their book. You wrote it. Minister Malcolm X, as great as he was, he did not have a understanding. Wow. White people are doing what? Lorraine Hansberry, she did not know. Wow. White people are doing what? Man. Anyway, I get both of, or maybe you might have to get all of the books that were, COINTELPRO was mentioned a lot. And see there, there's something wrong about there's something major retarded about us, like out of this world retarded about us. And I've heard this my whole life, where black people, part of the excuse will be, I don't have time. That is a total lie, and that's just how lame we are. Like I said, almost all the black people that I've never met a black person who did not have a television in their home. Never. And especially now, because you got a cell phone. I have met white people who deliberately do not have a television in their house. That means that I know a lot of black people who spend some time watching TV. You could turn the TV off for 5 minutes a day. This is what I've said before. 5 minutes. It's black people in prison. Mumia Abu-Jamal was on death row for decades. He wrote a book. I know Whitey goes upside our head, but I don't think anybody out there is having a time so tough. Man, I know Mumia wrote that book on death row. Books, plural, on death row, but I can't even read Racial Matters, because it's just going to hurt me so bad what they've done to black people. I also think that is lame. Extra lame, in fact, because I hear that all the time as an excuse, reading about that and what they did to Brother Malcolm, and reading about what they did to Winnie Mandela and the rest of that black vote. It just hurts me. That is lame. We sit around and name call. If we care so much about black people, hey, can we stop name calling Leroy? Maybe. I don't. We got these coons out here, and then some of them, they don't even have 8 black great-grandparents. So we got the name call. We got these coons out here, so, tethers and all, That's what I'm saying. No, I do not accept any of that. If it was really that important, replacing white supremacy with justice, Racial Matters, the FBI secret file on black America from 1960 to 1972. And again, how is that? Only white people write about COINTELPRO? And then they come back and say they're ignorant about racism? Only white people write about COINTELPRO. We don't even read about COINTELPRO? And then we'll say we love Malcolm X. How did he die? That's certainly not all of us. Black filmmaker put that project together on Minister Malcolm X that Joel Whitney gives lots of credit to, but wow. In general, we do not do very much reading at all. At all. No serious, even serious study about white supremacy, racism. Wow, lots of room for improvement. Lots of room for improvement. And hopefully we have done our small part to contribute, having a weekly book club. In fact, that book is so important in Silence or Indifference. That is a mega contributor to why we don't, that's not the totality, but that is a mega contributor. White people deliberately make sure you're not going to read no racial matter. You know who's going to have that book on the show? White people. Leroy, you're supposed to be watching, Richard Pryor, Martin Lawrence, Will Smith, having a rap battle, Any hoodles. Let's see. I make sure I get the filmmaker's name, and then we can wrap it up from it is a documentary, but as I said, it is very well researched. It's so much great information. Let's see, make sure I can get his. Abdur Rahman Muhammad. Abdur Rahman Muhammad, Who Killed Malcolm X. I think it came out like 2-3 years ago. It's like 4 or 5 installments. It might even be more than that, but it is great, super well researched. But again, what I say, any documentary or film period that is really high quality, I think the films that I have enjoyed and thought were the best that I've seen in my life, Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. Some of the best films that I've seen, hey, they inspire. Who Killed Malcolm X? They inspire you to go study. If you've not read The Judas Factor, Carl Evans, he's right there in that film. If you thought that film was great and wow, this really reminded me, and wow, they had these black dudes who locked up all that time. Wow, The Judas Factor, and then you'll know more about Patrice Lumumba and COINTELPRO. Reading, same thing with Soundtrack to Coup d'etat. That's the last 3 books that we read in the book club. Andre Bloom, Dr. Angelo Twice. That's supposed to be the point, not just watching TV all day. Somebody, what did she say? Reading is more important than watching television. And then she said, what to read? Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972. That's what to read. We will be here on Tuesday. Well, I'll confirm, but Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Invest if you think the cows is constructive. Gus T. looking to be in Milwaukee, Dahmerland for the spring, and then autumn in Buffalo. Sade Robinson murder trial in May, and then Peyton Gendron, will he get the death penalty for the Tops 2022 massacre? Cannot wait, even though that's 2 gruesome events, but I'm looking forward to being a counter-racist journalist. In court, not on trial. Invest, hit the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal button, top right corner. You'll see the links for PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo. Enormous gratitude to all of the folks investing, and hopefully we can do double duty, 2 constructive counter-racist trips that are safe and constructive, even though these are not like, I don't hear too many people saying, yeah, man, I'm excited, I'm taking a vacation to Milwaukee. Sobriety would be best, particularly how dangerous the planet. You got informants and spies and white mob violence and throwing bricks. We need high-functioning brain computers that do a lot of reading and high-level thinking to replace white supremacy with justice. They slipped a Mickey in Paul Robeson's drink. We talked about that. Drugs as weapons against us. John Patash's book. That is, Paul Robeson is a whole chapter, just like in this text. Drugs as weapons against us. White people coined, the same people we've been talking about. How do we neutralize Paul Robeson? We'll slip something and it will swango him up, and and his brain computer be messed up. He won't be able to think about replacing white supremacy with justice. Sobriety would be best. Creator, we ask that you help us maximize our time and energy to replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Help us to stop wasting non-white people's time and energy, including my own. Minimize contact, minimize conflict, stop name-calling black people, stop being discourteous to black people, stop gossiping, stop producing throwaway offspring. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.